The year was 1878, or thereabouts. The steam engine hissed and groaned, spilling heat and cinders onto a platform of raw, splintered wood. This was Dust Creek, a town that existed only because the railroad had decided to pause here. A jagged scar of progress cut deep into the New Mexico territory. Red dust, fine as flour, settled on everything. It coated the false fronts of the saloon, the land office, and the livery stable. It clung to the sweat-soaked uniforms of the few soldiers idling near the telegraph office and to the broad brims of the cowboys who had already started their day's drinking inside the swinging doors of the Last Chance saloon. Beyond the raw edges of the town, the land stretched out vast and unforgiving, a palette of scorched reds and browns under a pale, relentless sky. Far to the east, barely visible in the shimmering heat, were the low hills where the Mescalero Apache watched and waited, their small shelters blending into the earth. They were a people caught between the old ways and the new, just like the land itself. From the window of the passenger car, Rose Parker watched this new world swim into view. She was 19 years old, and she felt as pale and insubstantial as a ghost. She had come all the way from Ohio, a place of green lawns and predictable seasons, carrying a single worn suitcase and a small valise. Inside them were 3 simple dresses, her mother's Bible, and a letter. The letter was her entire future. It was a promise of marriage, penned by a man she had never met, a Mr. Edgar Thorne, who owned a prosperous general store in this very town. She was a mail-order bride, a piece of human freight delivered to the end of the line. Rose leaned her forehead against the grimy glass. The train had been shaking for 6 days, and the soot felt permanently etched into her skin. She caught her reflection in the window, superimposed over the alien landscape. It was not a face that inspired confidence. Her hair, a plain shade of brown, was pulled back so tightly it made her temples ache. Her eyes, too large for her face, were a watery gray blue. Her skin was white, the kind that freckled and burned but never turned a lovely gold. And then there was the scar, a small, silvery crescent just near her chin, from a fall she took as a child. She heard her aunt's voice, sharp and final, as if the woman were standing right behind her. "You are not a beauty. Rose, you are plain. You must cultivate a sweet temper and a tolerance for hard work, for that is all that will recommend you." All her life, she had been told she was not pretty, not special, not the kind of girl who turned heads or inspired poetry. She was just Rose, a quiet, unremarkable thing. She believed it. She had been raised on the knowledge of her own lack of value, and it sat inside her like a cold stone. This marriage, to a stranger in a land she could not imagine, was her only chance. A man, even a stranger, had chosen her from a letter. That had to mean something. The train shuddered to a final, bone-jarring halt. Rose gathered her valise, her hands trembling slightly. She stepped down from the car, her thin-soled boots sinking into the thick dust of the platform. The air was dry and hot, smelling of horse manure, stale whiskey, and something ancient and wild. He stood there, leaning against a support beam for the platform's narrow roof. He was not there to meet anyone. He was simply there, watching the world arrive and depart. His name was Cain Blackwind. He was an Apache, a man of perhaps 30 years, though the desert had carved lines into his face that made him look older. He wore buckskin leggings and a faded cotton shirt, with a vest of beaded leather over it. His black hair was long, pulled back from his high cheekboned face and tied at the nape of his neck. His eyes, dark and deep-set, missed nothing. The people of Dust Creek gave him a wide berth. They needed him, and they feared him. For half his life, Cain had moved between worlds. He had scouted for the army, leading blue-coated soldiers through canyons they could never have found on their own. He had tracked for bounty hunters. His skill at reading a broken twig or a scuffed patch of gravel spoken of in hushed tones. He could read the desert floor like a man in the East read a book. But he had also fought for his own people, defending the land that had been theirs for 1,000 years. This made him a complicated figure. The white settlers hated him for being an Indian, a reminder of the wildness they were trying to pave over with steel rails and property deeds. Some of his own people distrusted him, seeing the time he spent with the white men as a betrayal. He walked alone, a legend in the canyons and a pariah on the town's main street. Rose, however, knew nothing of this. She knew only that she was looking for a Mr. Edgar Thorne. She scanned the small crowd on the platform, a few weary-looking women, a pair of dusty prospectors arguing over a mule, and a tall, thin man in a rumpled suit. This man stepped forward, touching the brim of his hat. He had watery eyes like his suit, and a thin mouth that was trying to smile but was not quite succeeding. "Miss Rose Parker?" he asked. His voice was reedy. "Yes," Rose said, her own voice barely a whisper. She clutched her valise. "I am here to meet Mr. Edgar Thorne. Are you him?" The man's smile twitched. "Not exactly. I am Silas Thorne. Edgar was my brother." A cold feeling, colder than the stone in her gut, began to spread through Rose's chest. Silas nodded, looking past her at the departing train. He passed on. "Fever. I took him 3 months ago." He said it with all the emotion of a man reporting the weather. He looked back at her, and his eyes held a strange, assessing glint. "He was mighty sorry to miss you, I am sure. But you are here now, and that is the main thing." The air seemed to thin. 3 months. The man who had sent for her, the man who was her entire future, was dead. And this brother, this Silas, had not thought to send word. He had let her travel 2,000 miles into this desolate place for nothing. An air of deep wrongness, of a trap sprung, settled over her. But the letter, she stammered. "The store. Oh, the store is still here," Silas said, grabbing her larger suitcase from the platform. He did not offer to take her valise, such as it is. "Come along. Best get you settled." He led her off the platform and onto the town's single, wide street. It was not a street so much as a river of red dust, churned by wagon wheels and horses. Rose kept her head down, but she saw it all. She saw cowboys, drunk before noon, staggering out of the saloon. She saw women with painted faces and bright satin dresses watching from second-story windows, their eyes hard. She saw soldiers, their rifles slung casually, laughing too loudly. And further down, near the edge of town, she saw a small group of Apache men and women, their horses laden with goods, their faces impassive as they watched the white town that was slowly strangling their world. It was a place of raw, clashing energies, violence, greed, and a desperate, brittle lawlessness. Silas did not speak, just moved with a quick, nervous energy. He was leading her toward a squat, unpainted building with the words "Thorne Mercantile" faded on a sign above the door. As they passed the wide-open doors of the Last Chance Saloon, the sound of a tinny piano and rough laughter spilled out. Rose glanced inside, a reflexive, fearful movement, and her eyes met his. Kane Blackwind had moved from the platform to the saloon, standing just inside the shadows, away from the bar. He was nursing a small glass of whiskey, a payment for a tracking job. He had seen the girl arrive. He had seen her pale, frightened face, had seen Silas meet her, and had known, with the certainty of a man who reads signs, that this was not a happy arrival. Now, their eyes locked across the dusty street. Most men looked at Rose and saw nothing, or they looked at her with the casual, dismissive appraisal of a man judging livestock. The cowboys who had glanced at her on the street saw only a plain, flat-chested girl in a drab dress. Kane's gaze was different. It was not lustful. It was not kind. It was heavy, an intense, penetrating look that seemed to peel back her skin and see the bones beneath. He saw the white girl, small and lost. He saw her terror, her confusion, but he also saw something else, something buried deep in her two large eyes. He saw a flicker of something hard and resilient, something that had not yet broken. It was the look of a creature caught in a snare, one that was still deciding whether to chew off its own leg to get free. Rose flushed, a hot, painful wave of color rising up her neck. She broke the gaze first, her heart hammering. She felt as though she had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life, and it terrified her. She hurried after Silas, who had not even noticed. Kane watched her go, the small, stiff back disappearing into the shadows of the mercantile. He took a slow sip of his whiskey. He knew Silas Thorne. He knew the dead brother, Edgar, and he knew the man who truly owned this town, the man who owned the saloon, the sheriff, and very likely owned Silas as well. Cyrus Holt, a rancher whose land spread like a stain, who took the water he wanted and shot the men who complained. Holt hated two things above all: anyone who stood in his way, and Indians. Kane had crossed his path more than once. He looked down into his glass. A new player had just been dealt into Dust Creek's dirty game, a small, pale girl from the east, who thought she was here for a wedding. A question hung in the dry, hot air, a question that defined every life in this territory. In this chaos, who decided what a person was worth? Was it the society that judged and discarded? Or was it the person herself? Kane finished his whiskey. He had a feeling, a cold certainty in his gut, that the girl with the scarred chin was about to find out. Silas Thorne kicked the mercantile door open, revealing not a room, but a tomb. Dust motes, thick as cotton, swirled in the single shaft of light from the filthy front window. The air was dead, smelling of mouse droppings, spoiled flour, and something deeper, like rotted wood. The letters Rose held in her valise had spoken of a prosperous business. They described shelves laden with tinned goods from the east, bolts of fine cloth, new tools, and barrels of coffee. This place was a hollow shell. A few sacks of beans leaned drunkenly against one wall. A handful of rusted shovels were crossed in a barrel. The rest of the shelves were skeletons, vast and empty. This was wrong. This was all deeply, terribly wrong. Silas dropped her heavy suitcase by the door with a thud that echoed in the emptiness. His nervous, reedy energy had evaporated, replaced by something cold and flat. "Mr. Thorne," Rose began, her voice trembling. She clutched her small valise to her chest like a shield. "Silas, where are all the things, the store? It is nothing like his letters." Silas let out a short, dry laugh. Edgar was always good with his words, liked to write things as he wished they were, not as they were. He had big dreams, my brother, but he had a weak stomach for this country, and a weaker hand with his money. He did not look at the shelves. He looked at her. He walked a slow circle around her, his eyes assessing her the way a man might inspect a horse he was considering buying. "But you," he said, his voice dropping, "you are exactly as described." Rose recoiled. "What do you mean? What are you talking about, the goods?" Silas said, stopping in front of her. "That is what he called you in his last letter to me. Prime goods, fresh from the east." He was very particular about that. "I am not good," Rose said, her voice rising with a frantic, thin edge. "I am his intended wife. I came here to be married." "You are what I say you are," Silas snapped, his brief moment of contemplation gone. "And you are here. My brother is not. That is the problem we need to solve." Problem Rose backed away, hitting one of the empty counters. "I do not understand. My fiancée is gone. I must go home. I must return to Ohio." Silas laughed again, a sound like dry leaves skittering over rock. "Return on what? With what money? You think that train tickets work both ways. You spent every cent you had getting here. Did you not? Edgar's letters said as much. You have nothing. You are nothing, except what you brought with you." He leaned in, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. "Edgar died. Rose. He died 3 months ago, maybe 4. I lost track of the days. The fever took him to this very room, sweating and crying for his mama. The floor seemed to drop away from her. 3 months. He had been dead for 3 months. She had been writing her hopeful, nervous letters to a dead man. She had been traveling for 6 days, praying for strength to meet a corpse. 3 months, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "But you let me come. You knew I was on that train. The telegraph." "Of course I knew," he said, as if speaking to a dull child. "The ticket was paid for. Edgar paid it before he got sick. I could not just let such a valuable shipment go to waste. Waste not, want not. That is the rule out here. This was not misfortune. It was a snare. The cold stone of worthlessness she had carried in her gut her whole life suddenly felt like the only real thing she possessed. She had been raised to believe she was not pretty, that she had no value, and now she has been proven right in the most grotesque way possible. Her only value was as a piece of freight, and the sender was dead. "You are a monster," she breathed, the words tasting like ash. "I am a practical man," Silas said, his eyes glittering. "And you, my dear Rose, you are still a very rare item in this territory. A virgin, all the way from Boston, or Ohio, or wherever it is. Clean, untouched, polite." The bile rose in her throat. The very things that had made her invisible and plain in the East, her quiet nature, her inexperience, her purity, were now being discussed as the primary features of a piece of a livestock. "There are men in this territory," Silas continued, his voice becoming slick and conspiratorial. "Rich men. Men with gold mines and cattle ranches. Men who would pay a very high price for a girl like you. Not a wife, you understand. A permanent arrangement. A girl they can keep. I can arrange it. I know the men, for a price, of course. A finder's fee for my troubles." She was so shocked, so horrified. She could not even form a word of protest. The dream of a home, of a husband, of a respectable life, it had not just died. It had been a lie from the very beginning. She finally found her voice, fueled by a surge of pure, cold terror. "No, you will not. You cannot. I am a free citizen of this country. I will go to the sheriff." The mention of the sheriff made Silas grab her arm. His fingers, thin and bony, dug into her flesh like claws. "The sheriff," he spat. "He works for the same man I do. And that is who we are going to see right now. He will decide what to do with you. He is the law here." He yanked her out of the dark, dead store, back into the blinding sunlight and the swirling red dust. He pulled her down the wooden sidewalk, his grip merciless. "Please," Rose cried, stumbling to keep up, trying to wrench her arm free. "Let me go. You cannot do this. Please, someone help me." But the few people on the street, a prospector, 2 soldiers, a woman sweeping a doorstep, merely glanced at them and looked away. A man dragging a woman was not news in Dust Creek. It was just Tuesday. He dragged her toward the swinging doors of the Last Chance Saloon. The piano music grew louder, a frantic, tinny tune that sounded like a mocking laugh. Kane Blackwind was standing by the far end of the long bar, in the shadows, where he preferred to be. He was nursing his whiskey and finishing his business with a lazy-eyed deputy sheriff named Blevins. "I tell you, Kane," Blevins was saying, wiping his stained mustache, "those raids out by the pass are probably just some of your own people, looking for beef. Nothing for the army to get involved in." "They are not my people," Kane said, his voice low and flat. "The tracks are from shod horses, at least 10 of them. They ride like soldiers, not raiders, and they are white men." Blevins was about to reply with another lazy excuse when the saloon doors burst open, letting in a rectangle of blinding white light. Silas Thorne shoved the girl inside, stumbling into the relative dark. "Get in," Silas hissed, his voice high and nervous. "He is waiting." The saloon, which had been buzzing with low conversation and the clink of glasses, went quiet for a beat. Every eye turned to the newcomers, the weasel like Silas Thorne and the pale, terrified girl in the rumpled traveling dress, her hair coming loose from its tight bun. Silas, trying to puff himself up, announced to the room at large, "I have the new arrival for Mr. Holt." Kane watched from the shadows. He saw the girl's face, no longer just pale, but white with a terror that hollowed out her eyes. He saw Silas's hand clamped on her upper arm, his knuckles showing white. He recognized her instantly from the platform. A deep, animal instinct, honed by 30 years of survival, screamed at him, "Do not look. It is not your fight. She is white. This is their business. Interference is death." He had seen what happened to men who stepped into Cyrus Holt's affairs. He turned his shoulders slightly, presenting his back to them, and focused on the deputy. Silas was pulling Rose toward a closed door at the back of the room, past the gamblers' tables. Just as they reached it, the door opened, and a large man stepped out. He was broad as an ox, poured into an expensive silk vest that strained across his thick middle. His face was red, not just from the sun, but from a life of rich food and whiskey. This was Cyrus Holt. He held a glass of brandy in one thick hand. Well, Silas Holt's voice was a low rumble. Is this it? She does not look like much. He looked Rose up and down, his eyes lingering, and then dismissed her. He turned back to Silas. She looks half-starved. You told me at that moment. Rose, fueled by a final, desperate surge of self-preservation, ripped her arm from Silas's grasp. She stumbled backward, away from the huge, menacing man, and collided hard with a nearby table. A card player yelped as his chair tipped. His glass of whiskey flew from his hand, the amber liquid arcing through the air. It splashed directly onto the front of Cyrus Holt's expensive silk vest. The saloon did not just go quiet, it died. The air became thick and heavy. The piano player's hands froze above the keys. Cyrus Holt looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his chest. He did not move for a full 5 seconds. Then, slowly, he raised his head and looked at Rose. His face, already red, began to darken to a deep, dangerous purple. Rose was frozen, her hands half raised. "I'm so sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I did not mean to. I stumbled." His hand moved faster than she could have imagined. It was not a punch, but a flat, open-handed slap. It connected with her cheek with a sound that cracked through the silence like a pistol shot. The force of the blow snapped her head to the side and sent her sprawling onto the filthy, sawdust-covered floor. Her valise flew from her grasp and skittered under a table. Her cheek exploded in a universe of white-hot pain, and the whole room spun. Kane saw it. He did not just see it, he felt it. The sharp, wet sound of the impact. The girl's small, stifled cry as she fell. The image of the saloon dissolved. He was not a man of 30. He was a boy of 10, hiding behind a horse blanket in a canvas tent near Fort Stanton. He saw a soldier, his blue uniform unbuttoned, his face slack with drink. He saw the soldier strike his mother with that same flat, brutal sound, simply for not moving fast enough. He saw her fall, her dark hair spilling in the dirt. He saw the soldier laugh and turn away. Kane's hand clenched around his whiskey glass, so hard that the glass groaned. His entire body went rigid, every muscle screaming to leap across the room, to draw the heavy knife at his belt and carve the smile off the big man's face. But he did not. He held himself perfectly still. The deputy, Blevins, was watching him, a small, knowing smirk on his face. Every man in the saloon was watching. He was one Apache. They were in a room full of white men. He knew the rules. He would be dead before he took 2 steps. He forced the air from his lungs, slow and deliberate, pushing the memory down, locking it back in the dark place where it lived. He would not die. Not here, not for this white girl. The silence was broken by laughter. The card player who had been knocked over, the cowboys at the bar, even the painted woman watching from the stairs. They laughed at the girl on the floor. Cyrus Holt calmly took a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed at his vest. He looked down at Rose with no emotion at all. "Get her up, Silas, and get her in my office." "She has made a mess of my clothes." Silas, relieved that the anger had not been directed at him, scurried to obey. He grabbed Rose by her uninjured arm and hauled her roughly to her feet. She was dizzy, her vision swimming. Silent tears streamed down her face, stinging the raw, burning print of a man's hand on her skin. She could not believe this was happening. This was a nightmare. Silas shoved her through the back door and slammed it shut, plunging them into Cyrus's private office. It was a dark, heavy room, thick with the smell of cigar smoke, leather, and sweat. A massive oak desk sat in the middle, cluttered with papers, but they were not alone. A young man, a cowboy, barely older than Rose herself, was standing nervously by the desk, twisting his hat in his hands. "Mr. Holt, sir," the cowboy was saying, his voice earnest. I just mean, it has been 6 weeks since the drive ended. The boys and I, we just want what is owed. You said we would be paid when the herd sold in Santa Fe. Cyrus Holt ignored him completely. Walking to a sideboard, he poured himself a fresh brandy from a crystal decanter, his back to the cowboy. He glanced at Rose, who was huddled by the door, trembling. He dismissed her presence as if she were a coat rack. I said, Cyrus rumbled, without turning, that you would be paid when I decided the account was settled, but it did sell. Sir, the cowboy pressed, desperation making him bold. We saw the buyers. We are not asking for all of it, just enough for supplies. My wife is sick. We need medicine. Cyrus turned slowly, his face a mask of cold indifference. The explosive anger from the saloon was gone, replaced by something far more terrifying. Your wife's health is not my concern. Your pay is my concern. And I am concerned that you are in my office, bothering me about it, when I am conducting business. It is not fair, sir, the cowboy said, his voice cracking. We did the work. We rode for 2 months. We are owed $80 each. $80. The sum hung in the smoke-filled air. Cyrus sipped his brandy. He set the glass down very gently on his desk. You are right, son. The cowboy's face flooded with relief. Sir, you are owed, Cyrus said, and I always pay my debts. In full. He reached down and opened the top drawer of his desk. Rose watched, her breath caught in her throat, her own pain momentarily forgotten. Instead of a coin purse or a ledger, Cyrus pulled out a small, snub-nosed revolver. The cowboy's eyes went wide. His face turned to ash. Mr. Holt, please, I did not mean. Cyrus raised the gun, his movements as unhurried as a man swatting a fly. He aimed at the center of the young man's chest and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the small room. It physically threw Rose back against the door. The cowboy looked down at his chest, at the small, dark flower blooming on his plaid shirt. A look of profound, childlike surprise crossed his face. He made a small, wet sound in his throat, and then he collapsed backward onto the floor, his head striking the leg of the desk with a dull crack. Rose screamed. It was not a loud sound. It was a thin, tearing, animal noise that ripped from her raw throat. The smell of gunpowder and blood instantly filled her nose, choking her. Cyrus Holt did not even glance down at the body, his gaze, cold and sharp, fixed on Rose. She was no longer a piece of furniture. She was not a commodity. He saw her shaking, her eyes stretched wide, locked on the dead man. He saw that she had seen everything. He smiled. It was a slow, terrible smile that did not touch his eyes. Well, now, he said, his voice calm. This complicates things. Silas, hearing the shot and the scream, burst back into the room. Mr. Holt. What, he stopped, his eyes falling on the body on the floor. God Almighty. Cyrus. Clean this up, Cyrus ordered, his voice unchanged. Take him out the back way. Dump him in the arroyo. And her. He pointed the still-smoking revolver at Rose. She is not going anywhere. She is not for sale to anyone. Not anymore. Rose's mind finally grasped the new reality. She was not a bride. She was not a prostitute. She was a witness. Lock her in the main storeroom, Cyrus said, the one behind the mercantile. Put a good, strong lock on it. We will decide what to do with her after dark, back in the main saloon. The gunshot from the back room had caused only a momentary pause. Sounds like Holt settled an account. The deputy, Blevins, muttered into his beer. The piano player, after a brief hesitation, started playing again. Kane knew that sound. It was not settling an account. It was not a warning shot. It was an execution. He threw a few coins on the bar, far more than the whiskey was worth. I am finished here. Blevins looked up, surprised. What about those tracks? You are so sure you are not interested in them, Kane said. He turned and walked toward the door, his movements measured, not hurried. He pushed through the swinging doors, back into the brutal, cleansing sunlight. He walked past the dead mercantile building. He untied the reins of his horse from the hitching rail. He tried to push the images from his mind. The white girl's terrified face, the sharp, ugly sound of the slap, the final, muffled boom of the gun. It was their world, their violence, their rules. He had survived this long by staying out of it. He swung up onto his horse, his movements as fluid as water. He should ride east, back to the hills, back to his own people, where the air was clean, but he paused. His horse shifted nervously beneath him. He looked down the dusty, indifferent street, at the saloon, at the dark, empty windows of the mercantile, the girl's eyes, the ones that had met him across the street. He remembered the terror. Yes, but also that flicker of something hard and unbroken, deep inside. He thought of his mother, falling in the dirt. He thought of the endless, casual cruelty of these men who took and broke and killed and called it building a new world. He spat the dust from his mouth. He was not a hero. He was not a fool. He was a survivor. He kicked his horse, not east toward the safety of the hills, but slowly, deliberately, west, toward the edge of town. He rode to a small rise where the road curved, a place where he could watch the back of the saloon and the mercantile building without being seen. He told himself he was just watching. He was just curious. He was just waiting to see what happened next. But he knew, in the deep, quiet part of his heart, that he was lying. He was standing at a crossroads, and the hot desert wind was pushing him back toward the fire, in the smoky back office of the Last Chance Saloon. Cyrus Holt had taken off his stained vest. He sat in his large leather chair, a clean shirt on, calmly sipping a fresh brandy. The body of the young cowboy was gone, dragged out the back door and loaded onto a mule. Silas Thorne stood twisting his hat, his nervous energy having returned full force. God Almighty. Cyrus, what are we going to do? That girl saw it. She saw you shoot him plain as day. Cyrus looked at his brandy, swirling the amber liquid. She is a problem. You brought this problem to me. Silas, your brother's mess. I know, Silas said, his voice a high-pitched whine. But we can fix it. I know a man. He runs a high-class house in Santa Fe. He pays a fortune for girls like her, clean, from the east. We send her up on the next train. She is gone. The problem is gone. And we are rich. 2 problems, 1 solution. Cyrus took a slow sip. He set the glass down. You are a fool, Silas, and you think I am one. 2, we sent her to Santa Fe. What if she talks? What if she tells this man of yours, or a customer, or a marshal, that she saw me shoot a man in my own office? Word travels. I do not like loose ends, and I especially do not like witnesses who can talk. So we kill her, Silas whispered, his face going pale. Like the cowboy, Cyrus sighed, annoyed by the man's stupidity. That is messy, and a waste. You said to yourself she is valuable. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his thick fingers on the desk. No, we keep her here, for a few days. That storeroom behind your brother's failed shop is solid. We keep her locked up. We teach her. We teach her that talking is a very bad idea. We teach her what happens to people who displease me. He smiled, a cold, thin expression. That man from Santa Fe, the one you know he is due to pass through Dust Creek next week on his way to Tucson. I know him. We will keep her quiet, break her spirit. By the time he sees her, she will be too terrified to say her own name, let alone mine. And I will get a better price for her. Consider it a lesson in manners, for spilling whiskey on my clothes. Darkness. Rose was swimming in it. The storeroom was windowless, or at all. The one small opening was so high and caked with grime it let in no light. It smelled of rat droppings and mildewed grain. They had shoved her inside, and she had heard the heavy scrape of a wooden bar, followed by the definitive, metallic snap of a heavy padlock. She was on the floor, on a pile of empty burlap sacks. Her hands were tied, not tightly, but securely in front of her. Her whole body throbbed. Her cheek was a mask of fire, swollen and tender. But that pain was nothing. The only thing she could see, every time she closed her eyes, was the young cowboy's face. The look of surprise, the dark flower of blood, the way he fell. She was going to die. This was the lowest point. This was a place below worthlessness. She had come here as a bride, She had been demoted to goods. She had been slapped like an animal. And now, she was a witness, a piece of trash to be disposed of. All her life, she had been told she was nothing, plain, unremarkable. She had believed it. She had accepted it. And because she had accepted it, she had walked straight into this. Her passivity, her quiet acceptance of her own lack of value, had been her doom. She lay on the sacks and cried, silent, hot tears that made her raw cheeks sting even more. She wept for the girl she had been, the fool who believed a letter. She wept for the young cowboy who died for $80. And then, a new feeling. It started deep in her belly. A cold, hard knot that was not fear. It was anger, a pure, clean rage that burned away the despair. They thought she was nothing. They thought they could lock her up, break her, sell her, or kill her. They thought she was just a plain, quiet girl from Ohio. She sat up. The movement sent a jolt of pain through her. She did not care. She looked down at her hands, at the rough rope biting into her wrists. If she did nothing, she was already dead. If she did nothing, she deserved the fate they had planned for her. No, she whispered into the thick, foul-smelling dark. I will not. She began to work on the ropes. She twisted her wrists, pulling the fibers against each other. It hurt. The rope was coarse and stiff. It scraped the skin from her bones. But she did not stop. She focused on the pain. It was real. It meant she was still alive. She pulled and twisted, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, her tears drying in the heat of her own fury. Cain Blackwind had not left. He had ridden to the small rise just west of town, a place shadowed by juniper and rock. From there, he could see the back of the mercantile and the saloon. He sat on his horse, as still as the rock formations around him. The sun set, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and blood orange, before collapsing into a deep, star-filled black. The Last Chance Saloon was a bright, noisy square of yellow light in the darkness. The tinny piano music, thin and frantic, carried on the night wind. He should go. This was not his fight. He said the words to himself, a mantra he had used for 10 years to stay alive. It is white men's business. They kill each other. They slap their women. They sell their girls. It is their world. It has nothing to do with you. He had seen it his entire life. He had seen soldiers, settlers, and prospectors take what they wanted, whether it was land or water or a human life. He had survived by being invisible, by being useful when he had to be, and a ghost when he did not. Getting involved was suicide. He knew the rules. But the sound of that slap would not leave his ears. It echoed. It mixed with a memory, sharp and cold, of his mother falling, her face bearing the print of a soldier's hand. He saw the girl on the platform, her eyes too large for her face. He saw the flicker of spirit, the unbroken thing deep inside her. He hated this feeling. It was a sickness in his gut, a conflict that pulled his spirit in two. To act was to risk death. To do nothing, to ride away, felt like a different kind of death, a death of the soul. He stayed, watching the lights of the saloon burn against the hills. He watched the moon, a cold, silver razor, climb the sky. He was a man of honor, and he was a survivor. And for the first time in his life, he did not know which one he was supposed to be. The sky was a pale, cold gray when he finally moved. Dawn. He had not slept. He nudged his horse forward, not east to his camp, but back toward Dust Creek. He had a reason, a practical one. He still had not collected his pay from the deputy. He would get his money, and then he would leave. That was the plan. He rode down the main street, which was already stirring. A blacksmith's hammer rang out. He tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and walked, his moccasins making no sound on the wooden boardwalk. As he passed the alley between the saloon and the hotel, he heard voices. Not American voices. He heard the low, rapid speech of his own people. 2 mescalero women, their skirts dark with mud, were scrubbing sheets in a large wooden tub outside the hotel's back door. They worked for the hotel, doing the laundry the white women would not touch. They kept their voices low, but he heard every word. He is a devil, that one. Halt, the first woman said, her hands wringing a heavy sheet. He is not a man. He is a bear with no heart. The second one agreed. Did you hear what he did to the new girl, the white one? From the train, Cain paused, his body hidden by the corner of the building. The one Silas brought to him? Yes, he has her locked in the old storeroom, behind the dead man's shop. I took Silas his breakfast this morning, and I heard her crying. He is keeping her. He is keeping her like a horse he means to break. That is what Silas said. He laughed when he said it. Cain closed his eyes. The internal debate, the war between survival and honor, ended. It was not a decision. It was a fact. The sickness in his gut crystallized into a single, cold point of action. Like a horse he means to break. He did not go to the sheriff's office. He turned, melting back into the shadows of the alley. He moved with a purpose he had not felt in a long time. He circled the block, staying behind the buildings, his eyes scanning every roofline, every window. He found the storeroom. It was a separate building, squat and solid, made of thick wooden planks. A heavy bar was across the door, secured with a large, new iron padlock. He checked the area. It was clear. The back of the saloon was quiet. He moved to the side of the building. There was a window, high up, just as he had suspected, a single pane of glass, covered in a thick layer of filth. He found a discarded crate, moved it silently beneath the window. He stepped up. He could just see inside. He heard her before he saw her. A small, rhythmic sound, a rasping, desperate whisper. I will not. I will not. I am Rose Parker. I am from Ohio. I will not. He wiped a small circle of grime from the glass. He peered through the crack. She was there, sitting on the floor, her back against a stack of sacks. Her hair was a wild tangle, full of straw and dirt. The left side of her face was a grotesque map of purple and black. Her eyes swollen almost shut. Her wrists were bloody. The ropes were still on, but she was pulling at them, her small, raw hands twisting and tearing at the knot. She was not crying. Her eyes, the one he could see clearly, were wide and blazing in the dim light. She was not a victim waiting for death. She was a trapped animal, chewing at the steel. She was exactly the person he had seen on the platform. He tapped on the glass. 1, 2. She froze. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a terror that clawed at his gut. Who is it? She whispered, scrambling backward. Silas missed her. Halt. Please, I did not mean anything. Please. His voice was a low rumble, barely louder than the wind. Do not scream. She stopped, her body rigid, her head tilted, listening. It was not Silas. It was not Holt. I am not with them, he said, his mouth close to the glass. I do not work for Holt. He saw the confusion on her face. Who are you? My name is Cain Blackwind. He watched her process the name. He saw the flicker of recognition. I saw you. On the platform. And in the saloon. The Indian. She breathed. The man with the assessing eyes. Yes, he said. Do you want to live? She did not hesitate. Not for a second. Her voice was a raw, fierce whisper. Yes, be ready, he said. Do not make a sound. Wait for the dark. When the moon is high, I will come back for you. Be ready. He dropped from the crate and was gone, melting back into the alleys. Rose stared at the dirty window. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a wild, painful, beautiful rhythm. She did not know if he was telling the truth. He could be a trap. He could be one of Holt's men, testing her. But she did not believe it. She remembered his eyes. They were not the eyes of a liar. She went back to work on the ropes. But this time, she was not just fighting against death. She was fighting for life. The night was deep. The moon was a high, cold sliver, casting long, black shadows. Cain moved through those shadows. He carried nothing but his knife and a long, thin piece of steel he had taken from a broken wagon spring. He reached the storeroom. The town was asleep, except for the saloon, which still leaked its tinny music. He knelt by the padlock. He slid the piece of steel into the keyhole, his fingers impossibly slow and patient. He felt the tumblers, visualizing their mechanism. He applied pressure. He felt one pin click, then a second. He held his breath. A final, sharp snap echoed in the silence. The lock sprang open. He slid the heavy bar back, his muscles straining to keep it silent. He opened the door a crack. The stench of spoiled grain and fear hit him. It was black inside. "Rose," he whispered. A movement in the dark. "I am here." He slipped inside, pulling the door almost shut. He found her in the blackness, his hand closing on her shoulder. She flinched but did not cry out. He pulled his knife and, in one swift motion, cut the ropes from her wrists. "Come," he said. "We go. My horse is close." "Well, well, well." The voice, reedy and mocking, came from the doorway. A lantern was raised, flooding the storeroom with yellow light. Silas Thorne stood there, a wide, triumphant grin on his face. In his other hand, he held a large revolver, and it was pointed directly at Kane's chest. "What do we have here?" Silas sneered. "A thieving Indian. I had a feeling you were trouble. Cyrus will pay me double for shooting you. And the girl trying to run. He will be very, very angry." Rose stifled a scream, her hand flying to her mouth. Silas raised the pistol, taking aim. "Now! You just stand still." Kane did not wait. He did not hesitate. He moved before Silas could finish the sentence. He launched himself forward, not at the man, but at the lantern. He smashed it with his forearm, plunging the room back into absolute, chaotic darkness. "Ah!" Silas yelled. Surprised, the revolver fired. A deafening explosion that lit the room for a second in a flash of white fire. The bullet went wild, tearing through the wooden wall. Rose screamed. Silas shouted, disoriented in the sudden blackness. Kane grabbed Silas's gun hand. They wrestled, grunting, knocking over sacks of grain. Kane was all sinew and speed. Silas was weak, fueled only by panic. Kane slammed his elbow into Silas's jaw, the sound a dull, sickening crack. Silas cried out, stumbling backward. He tripped over a barrel and fell, his head striking the corner of a heavy, solid wooden support post. There was a sound like a melon splitting open, a wet, heavy thud. Silas groaned, a low, rattling sound, and then was silent. The silence that followed was terrifying. The only sound was Rose, hyperventilating in the corner. "Did you kill him?" she whispered, her voice shaking apart. Kane found the man in the dark. He put his fingers to Silas's neck. He felt a pulse, but it was there. He felt the sticky warmth of blood matting his hair. "He is alive," Kane said, his voice grim. "But we cannot stay." He heard shouting from the saloon. The gunshot had done its work. "We go now." He grabbed Rose's hand. She was frozen, paralyzed by the violence. "Run," he commanded, and his voice snapped her out of it. He pulled her out the door. He did not go toward the street. He pulled her into the dark, narrow alley between the buildings. His horse was there, tied to a fence post, silent and patient. Lights were appearing in the saloon. Men were shouting. Kane swung up onto the horse's back. He reached down, his arms circling her waist. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, placing her in front of him on the horse. "Hold on," he ordered. She wrapped her small, raw hands in the horse's mane, pressing her body back against his. He kicked the horse, not into a walk, but a dead run. They shot out of the alley, crossed the street in a flash of dark motion, and plunged into the vast, open desert night, leaving the lights and the violence of Dust Creek behind them. The horse's hooves pounded the earth, a desperate rhythm. Rose clung to the animal, the wind ripping the breath from her lungs. It was cold, so cold, and the wind stung her bruised face. She heard the distant, lonely cry of a coyote, and it sounded like a lament. The mountains were black giants against a sky full of cold, glittering stars. She was terrified. She was fleeing a murder scene with a man she did not know, an Indian, a stranger. She was probably riding to her death. But as the horse devoured the ground, putting miles between her and the locked room, a strange, wild feeling bloomed in her chest. She was moving, She was free. There were no walls. There were no locks. There was only the wind, the dark land, and the steady, solid heat of the man holding her. She was, for the first time in her life, utterly and completely alive, back in Dust Creek. Cyrus Holt stood over the groaning, bloody form of Silas Thorne. The storeroom was a mess, and the girl was gone. The Indian. Cyrus roared, his face purple with rage. He had been defied. He had been stolen from, in his own town.
"Get a posse," he bellowed at the deputy. 10 men. I want him. I want that treacherous Indian. And I want the girl. I do not care if you bring her back alive or dead. But I want that witness. Find them. Kane rode for hours, pushing the horse through a labyrinth of canyons and dry riverbeds. He did not follow a trail. He was on the trail, moving with an instinct for the land that felt like a sixth sense. Rose clung to him, her face buried against the rough cotton of his shirt, her body numb. The terror of the escape had faded, leaving behind a cold, bone-deep exhaustion. The horse's movements were a jarring, relentless rhythm. The man who held her was a silent, unyielding presence, his arm a band of steel around her waist, holding her in place. She was not a person. She was cargo. Just as the sky began to bleed from black to a bruised, pearly gray. He stopped. The horse stood, its sides heaving, its breath pluming in the cold morning air. "We are here," Kane said. He slid from the horse's back in one fluid motion, landing silently on the rocky ground. Rose's body was a single, dull ache. She tried to move her legs, but they were numb, locked in place. She could not dismount. She made a small, frustrated sound. Kane looked up at her, his face impassive in the gray light. He did not offer a hand. He did not offer soft words. He simply put his hands on her waist and lifted her down, as he had before, as if she were a sack of grain. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched the ground. She collapsed onto her knees, her hands scraping against the gravel. He let her fall. He turned away to tend to his horse, loosening the cinch, speaking to it in a low, soft voice that was not English. Rose stayed on her knees for a long moment, breathing in the sharp, clean air. It smelled of pine and damp earth. She pushed herself up, her body screaming in protest. She looked around. They were in a small, hidden valley, a deep bowl carved into the Red Rock Mountains. It was invisible from any distance. A small, clear stream cut through the center, lined with tall cottonwood trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn yellow. A thin column of blue smoke rose from a central fire pit, perhaps a dozen small, dome-shaped shelters, made of brush and hide, were scattered among the trees. A herd of horses grazed peacefully by the stream. It was the complete opposite of Dust Creek. It was not a scar on the land. It was part of it. It was quiet. It was alive. People began to emerge from the shelters. A few women, their dark hair long and loose, stopped their morning work to stare. Their faces were not hostile, just curious and guarded. A few older men nodded at Kane. Then a woman strode forward, separating from the others. She was young, perhaps only a few years older than Rose, and tall. She wore a buckskin dress, and her movements were sharp and full of a restless, angry energy. She had Kane's high cheekbones and dark, penetrating eyes. She stopped a few feet from him, her gaze fixed on Rose. She looked at the white girl, at her torn dress, her matted hair, and the grotesque, swollen bruise that covered her cheek. "You brought her here," the woman asked. Her English was perfect, laced with a sharp, cutting edge. "She needed help," Kane said, his voice flat as he rubbed down the horse. "A white girl," the woman said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You brought a white girl here, to our last safe place. What trouble did you buy?" "My brother. She is not in trouble. She is a witness," Kane said. "Cyrus Holt shot a man in his office. She saw it. He locked her up. He was going to sell her or kill her." The woman, Naomi, looked at Rose again, her eyes traveling from Rose's bloody wrists to her bruised face. The look was not one of pity. It was a cold calculation. A white man kills another white man. A white woman sees it. And now, it is our problem.
She turned her back on Rose and spoke to Cain in the low, rapid syllables of their own language. It was clearly an argument. An old man, his face a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles, sat cross-legged by the central fire. He had been watching, his eyes never leaving Rose. He was Old Bear, the elder and the healer of this small band. He did not speak, but his gaze felt heavier and more penetrating than Naomi's anger. A few other warriors had gathered, their arms crossed. One man, powerfully built, with a deep scar on his own jaw, watched Cain with open hostility. He said something sharp, jabbing a finger toward Rose. He saw her as a threat. Rose felt a familiar, sickening wave of shame. She was back where she had always been an object of scorn, a problem, a plain, unwanted thing. These women, even Naomi with her anger, were strong. They moved with purpose. They belonged to the earth they stood on. Rose felt pale and useless, a ghost blown in by the wind. Naomi finished her argument with Cain and strode over to Rose. She was holding something in her hands. She threw it at Rose's feet. It was a simple, worn dress of soft deer hide and a pair of moccasins. "You cannot wear that," Naomi said, gesturing to Rose's torn and filthy traveling suit. "It smells of the town." She pointed to a small, isolated shelter. "Change, then come to the fire. You will eat." Rose hurried away, clutching the clothes. Inside the small wickiup, she tore off the remnants of her old life. The dress was too large, but it was soft against her raw skin. The moccasins felt strange, like wearing nothing at all. She saw her reflection in a small piece of trade mirror hanging from a post. The girl who looked back was a stranger. The bruised, swollen face, the wild hair, the scar on her chin. She remembered her aunt's voice. "You are not a beauty." She felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her chest. She was not just plain. She was a ruin. She was more ugly, more lost than she had ever been in her life. When she returned to the fire, Naomi handed her a bowl of hot corn mush. It was bland, but it was the best thing Rose had ever tasted. She ate, her hands shaking, acutely aware of the eyes on her. Cain was sitting across the fire, speaking quietly with Old Bear. He did not look at her. After she ate, she felt a desperate, panicked need. She had to fix this. She had to undo it. She walked over to Cain. "Mr. Blackwind," she said. Her voice was a hoarse whisper. He looked up. "You must take me back," she said, the words tumbling out. "I cannot stay here. I am grateful. You saved my life. But I cannot be here. I must go home. To Ohio. If you can just get me to the train station in the next town. Santa Fe, anywhere. I must go." Cain listened. His face did not change. When she was finished, he stood up. He was much taller than her. "There is no home," he said. His voice was not cruel, just flat. It was the voice of a man stating a fact, like a man saying the sky is blue. "What Holt?" he said. "You think he is just in Dust Creek. He owns the sheriff. He owns the telegraph operator. He has men on his payroll from here to Santa Fe. The first thing he did was send a message. Every train station, every stagecoach stop, they are looking for me. And they are looking for you." "But I am a free citizen," she stammered, falling back on the only rules she knew. "He cannot just hunt me." Cain almost smiled. It was a cold, bitter expression. "He can, and he will. You saw him kill a man for $80. What do you think he will do to the woman who saw him do it? You are a witness. You are a loose end. Out here, we do not have your Eastern laws. We have the law of the man with the most guns and the most money. That man is Cyrus Holt. If you leave this valley, you will be dead before sunset. Or worse, you will be taken back to him." The truth landed on her like a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. The civilized world, the world of laws and sheriffs and train tickets, was gone. It had evaporated the moment she stepped onto the platform. She was on a different planet. "So what do I do?" she whispered, looking at the alien. Watchful faces around the fire. "You are alive," Cain said, turning back to the fire. "That is the first step. Now, you learn to stay that way." The next days were a blur of pain and humiliation. Cain was true to his word. If she was to stay, she was not to be a guest. She was not cargo. She had to work. He started with the horses. He showed her how to groom his own paint stallion, a mean-tempered animal that snapped at her. Her hands, soft from her life in Ohio, were rubbed raw. She learned to mix feed, to check hooves for stones, and to carry heavy buckets of water from the stream. Naomi taught her how to make fire, not with matches, but with a drill, a small bow, and a piece of dry wood. Rose's hands bled, and her arms ached, but after 2 days of failure, she produced a single, precious ember. She wept with triumph. Naomi showed her which plants to gather, which roots were poison and which were food, and how to grind corn into a meal. Naomi's movements were quick, efficient, and impatient. She clearly viewed Rose as a slow-witted child, but she did not refuse to teach. The hardest part was the riding. Cain would not allow her to ride with him. He put her on an old mare, a horse with a stubborn streak and a rough gait. "You learn," he said, simply. She fell. She fell into dust, into prickly bushes, and once into the cold stream. Every time she got back on, her body a tapestry of new bruises, her pride so battered it barely existed. Then came the weapons. "You will not be helpless," Cain said. He put a heavy Winchester rifle in her hands. It was impossibly heavy. She could barely lift it to her shoulder. "I cannot," she said, her arms shaking. "It is too much." He stepped behind her. She froze. His body was close, not touching, but she could feel the heat of him through her deerskin dress. His presence was overwhelming. "You are fighting it," he said, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "Your shoulders are tight. Breathe. Let the air out." He put his hand on her shoulder, his fingers strong, pushing it down. "Here." His other hand moved to her waist, steadying her, anchoring her to the ground. His touch was not sexual. It was not gentle. It was practical. It was the touch of a master correcting an apprentice. But it was also the first time a man had touched her with such impersonal, solid strength. And her heart began to hammer against her ribs. "Now," he said, "look at the rock, the one with the white stripe. See only the rock. Let the world go away. And pull." She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The rifle kicked back like a mule, slamming into her shoulder. It would have knocked her flat, but his hand on her waist held her upright. She gasped, the smell of sulfur filling her nose. She had missed the rock by 10 feet. "Again," was all he said. They were out for a full day, checking the perimeter of the valley. Cain had decided she needed to learn to see, to read the land. He moved with a silence that she found unnerving. He had shown her a broken branch, the print of a coyote's paw, the place where a deer had slept. She saw nothing but rocks and dust. They were riding through a narrow split in the rock, a dry wash that led to the high plateau. Suddenly, Cain stopped. He held up his hand, his body perfectly still. Rose listened. She heard nothing but the wind. He slid off his horse and pulled her down with him, his hand clamping over her arm. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice urgent. "Do not move. Do not breathe. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear." He pushed her into a deep, narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders. She was completely hidden. She watched him. He did not draw his rifle. He did not run. He simply vanished. He melted into the rocks, moving up the side of the canyon wall, his feet and hands finding holds she could not even see. A minute later, she heard them. The clop of shod horses on stone. Voices. 3 riders appeared at the mouth of the wash. They were white men, cowboys. She recognized the brand on their saddles. They worked for Cyrus Holt. "Heard that shot yesterday," one of them said, spitting tobacco. "Came from up this way." "You sure this is the way to that Apache camp?" Blevins said he said they hide up in these canyons. "We found the girl. We are rich. Holt wants her bad." They stopped, their horses milling nervously. They were looking at the ground. "These tracks are strange," the first man said. "Looks like a single rider. But it just stops. Right here." Rose's blood ran cold. They were on Cain's trail. Suddenly, there was a sound from high above them, on the opposite ridge, a cascade of small rocks, tumbling down the cliff face. It was not a large sound, but in the silence of the canyon, it was loud. The men's heads snapped up. Their rifles came out. What was that up there? I saw movement. Probably a goat or Indian. Let's check it out. It is the only sign we have had all day. Grumbling, they spurred their horses, leaving the wash and heading up the steep trail toward the false sound. Rose waited, her heart in her throat, for what felt like an hour. Then, he was just there. He dropped from the rock face above her, landing as silently as a cat. She let out a gasp. "How did you do?" "I circled them," he said, his face grim. He had climbed over the ridge, moved behind them, and created a diversion, leading them away on a false trail. He had not fought them. He had not run. He had thought them away. Rose stared at him, a new kind of understanding dawning. His strength was not just in his hands or with his gun. It was in his mind. He was part of this land. He used it as a weapon. That night, the camp was subdued. Rose sat by the fire, nursing her aching muscles. Naomi came and sat near her, adding wood to the flames. The animosity from the first day had softened, replaced by a grudging acceptance. "You did not scream today," Naomi said. "When the scouts were in the wash, I was too scared to scream," Rose admitted. Naomi almost smiled. She looked into the fire, her face sad. "You ask why we are here? Why do we hide in this canyon? Why did I hate to see your face?" Rose stayed silent. "Our land was south of here," Naomi said, her voice low. "Good land, with a river. My grandfather is buried there." Then the soldiers came. They said the land was for settlers. They pushed us into the high rocks, where nothing grows. She poked the fire with a stick. My husband was Taza's brother. He did not want to go. He fought back. He and 3 others. The soldiers hunted them. They hanged them in the square at Fort Stanton. They called them renegades. They left them hanging for 3 days, as a warning. Rose felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She was seeing this world through their eyes. This was not a disagreement. This was a war. "Cain, your brother," Rose said. "He scouted for the army. I heard them say it in town. He did," Naomi said, her voice hard. He thought if he helped them, if he showed them we were not all monsters, they would see reason. He thought he could make peace. He was wrong. He led them, and they betrayed him. They used his skill to trap our own cousins. He has never forgiven himself, and Taza has never forgiven him." Rose looked at the man across the fire. He was not just a gruff, silent warrior. He was a man torn in two, carrying a weight she could not imagine. She had seen herself as a burden, a danger to these people. She felt the guilt of it, of bringing Cyrus Holt's violence into their last, small sanctuary. But as she looked at Cain, she also felt something else, a deep, pulling admiration, a dangerous, frightening warmth. He was the most complicated, the most honest, and the most capable man she had ever met. The next afternoon, a rider entered the camp, an Apache scout who had been watching Dust Creek. He dismounted, his face grim, and spoke immediately to Old Bear and Cain. The quiet camp gathered. Cain listened, his expression hardening into stone. "What is it?" Naomi asked. Cain turned. He looked at the faces of his people. His gaze settled on Rose. "Cyrus Holt has put out a reward," Cain said, his voice flat and carrying in the still air. "A reward?" Taza, the hostile warrior, stepped forward. "For you, how much?" $100, Cain said. "For my head?" Taza spat. "He values you cheaply." "That is not all," Cain said, his eyes still locked on Rose. "He is offering another price." A terrible, cold silence fell over the valley. $200, Cain said, his voice dropping. "For the white girl. He wants her back, alive." The air left Rose's lungs. $200. It was a fortune. It was more money than she had ever seen. It was enough to buy a ranch. It was enough to make any desperate man in the territory a bounty hunter. She was not a person. She was not even a witness. She was a prize. Taza turned, his face a mask of fury, and pointed at her. She is a curse. She is not a woman. She is a sack of gold. They will hunt us for her. They will never stop. She will be the death of us all." Taza's words hung in the air, sharp and heavy as an axe. "She will be the death of us all." Rose flinched, her entire body recoiling as if struck. She looked around the circle of faces, seeing his accusation reflected in their guarded, fearful eyes. He was right. She was a curse. She was a $200 bounty, a walking disaster that had brought nothing but danger to this hidden valley. The shame was so total, so crushing. It stole her breath. She wanted to run, to disappear into the rocks, to simply cease to be. Before anyone could answer, Taza, Old Bear, raised a hand. His movements were slow, but they commanded an immediate, absolute silence. He spoke, not to Taza, but to the sky, his voice a dry rasp like leaves blowing over stone. He spoke in the Apache tongue, his words a rhythmic chant. Cain translated, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the elder. "He says the wind is rising, not the wind of men, but the wind of the mountain. We must prepare." As if summoned by his words, the air changed. The light, which had been clear and sharp, turned a sickly, sulphurous yellow. The breeze that had been whispering through the cottonwoods died, leaving a dead, heavy stillness. A silence so profound it felt like the world was holding its breath. "What is it?" Rose whispered, her fear of Taza instantly replaced by a new, more primal terror. "A storm," Naomi said, her head tilted, sniffing the air. "A bad one. Secure the horses, check the wiki-ups." Now, the camp exploded into frantic, focused activity. The argument was forgotten, replaced by the immediate, larger threat. Men ran to the small herd, shouting, their ropes whistling. Women rushed to their shelters, adding weight to the coverings, securing food. "You, with me." Cain ordered Rose, "We must bring in the stallion and the mare. They are grazing in the high pasture, by the caves." He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward 2 horses that were already saddled. He did not wait for her to mount. He threw her onto the back of the old mare she had been riding and leaped onto his own paint. "Ride!" he shouted, and his voice was nearly lost in the first, sudden shriek of the wind. It did not come gradually. It hit them like a solid wall. The sickly yellow sky turned a roiling, angry brown. Sand and grit instantly filled the air, stinging their faces, blinding them. The wind howled, a rising, screaming noise that sounded like 1,000 tormented spirits. Rose leaned low over the horse's neck, her eyes squeezed shut, clinging to the mane with her raw hands. She could not see. She could only feel the mare stumbling beneath her and hear the overwhelming, deafening roar of the world coming apart. She felt Cain grab her horse's bridle. He was yelling something, but the words were stolen by the storm. He was pulling her, leading her horse through the chaos. She trusted him. She had no other choice. They rode for what felt like an eternity. The air so thick with sand she could barely breathe. It was a gritty paste in her mouth, her nose. Then the sound changed. The scream of the wind was muffled, and the horse's hooves clattered on stone. He had pulled them into a cleft in the rock. He half fell, half jumped from his horse and pulled her down. The cave, he bellowed over the storm. "Get the horses inside." Now he shoved her toward a dark opening in the rock face, a large, deep cave he knew from his youth. Rose grabbed the bridle of the terrified mare, pulling with all her weight, while Cain fought his stallion, which was rearing and striking, its eyes white with fear. They tumbled inside, horse and human. Just as the main force of the sandstorm hit, the entrance to the cave became a solid, roaring wall of brown. It was as if the world outside had been erased. Inside, it was dark and echoing. The horses stamped and snorted, their fear a palpable thing in the enclosed space. Rose collapsed against the wall, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. From cold, from fear, from sheer exhaustion. "We are safe," Cain said. His voice was oddly calm in the relative quiet, though the wind still shrieked like a predator at the mouth of the cave. "For now." He moved with his usual economy of motion. He tethered the horses in the back of the cave, where they would be sheltered. He spoke to them, his voice that low, soft murmurs she had heard before, and they began to quiet. He came back to her. She was huddled against the rock, her arms wrapped around her knees, trying to stop the violent shivering. The temperature had plummeted with the storm. It was suddenly bitterly cold. "We need fire," he said. He unslung a small bundle from his saddle. He had dry wood. He always had dry wood. He found a place near the entrance, sheltered from the wind but close enough for the smoke to escape. He used his drill, his movements quick and practiced. In moments, just as she had learned to do. He had a glowing coal. He fed it tinder, and a small, brave flame leaped to life. The fire pushed back the shadows, revealing the cave. It was deep, the walls streaked with minerals. The small blaze cast leaping shadows, turning the small space into an intimate, protected world. Cain sat back on his heels, watching the fire. Rose huddled closer to it, extending her shaking, bloody hands to the warmth. He looked at her, and his face was unreadable in the flickering light. "Your hands," he said. "They are fine," she whispered, trying to hide them. They were scraped raw from the ropes, and now from the horse's mane. He reached for the small pouch at his belt. He took out a container and opened it. It was a thick, dark salve that smelled of pine and herbs. He held it out. She hesitated, then slowly extended her hand. He did not take her hand. He simply let her take the container. She rubbed the salve into her palms, her fingers. It stung, but it was a clean, healing pain. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the roar of the wind outside and the crackle of the flames. The horses settled, their breathing deep and rhythmic. Cain took a thick wool blanket from his saddle roll. He shook it out. Rose watched him. She expected him to wrap himself in it. Instead, he came and sat on the ground a few feet from her, close enough to share the fire. He unfolded the blanket and, with one efficient motion, draped it over his own shoulders, and then over hers, creating a shared tent of warmth. She froze. His body was close. She could feel the solid warmth of his shoulder near hers. Though they were not touching, she could smell him, the clean scent of sage and pine from the salve, the smell of dust, horse, and something that was just him, something male and wild. The air between them was suddenly thick, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the storm. He fed more wood to the fire. The flames leaped higher. The light played across his face, and for the first time, she truly saw him. He had taken off his vest, and his cotton shirt was open at the throat. The firelight glinted on the smooth, copper skin of his chest. It illuminated the lines of his face, the high cheekbones, the strong jaw, and it illuminated his scars. There was a long, pale one that ran from his collarbone down, disappearing under his shirt. There was a puckered, round scar on his shoulder, the mark of an old bullet. These were not the marks of an easy life. They were the marks of a warrior. He felt her looking at him. He did not turn. "What is it?" he asked the fire. "Your scars," she whispered. "You live in this land," he said, his voice low. "You collect them. They are a map of where you have been." She looked down at her own hands, at the red, stinging skin of her palms, at the still livid purple of her cheek in the firelight. She thought of the small, silvery mark on her chin, a map of where she had been. A sudden, terrible wave of self-pity, of her old, familiar worthlessness, washed over her. It was so strong it was a physical ache. "I hate my map," she whispered, the words surprising her. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes fixing on her. "Why, it is the map of a fool," she said, her voice tight with unshed tears. A plain, stupid girl who believed a letter. A girl who was so desperate to be wanted that she let herself be shipped across the country like a piece of goods. The map of a girl no one ever looked at twice. Until they wanted to sell her, the words were out, ugly and raw, hanging in the warm, enclosed air of the cave. Taza was right, she continued, the tears now breaking free, sliding hot down her cold, bruised cheek. "I am a curse, a sack of gold. That is all I am to anyone. That is all I have ever been. She looked at him, her vision blurred, her heart breaking. I am not pretty. The words were a confession, a statement of fact that had defined her entire existence. It was the core of her identity. I am not pretty. I am not valuable. I am not wanted. I am not even a real woman, she choked out, a final, humiliating admission. I am a virgin, 19 years old, and no man has ever touched me, or wanted to, until Silas, until Holt, and they only wanted me because I was a commodity, a thing to be sold. She buried her face in her raw hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She had laid her soul bare. She had shown him the full, pathetic truth of her ugliness, her worthlessness. Cain was silent. He was so still he might have been carved from the rock of the cave itself. The only sound was her quiet, desperate weeping and the howl of the storm outside. She felt him move. It was not a sudden movement. It was a slow, deliberate shifting. She felt the blanket tighten as he turned his body toward her. She lowered her hands, her face wet, her eyes swollen, ready for his pity or his dismissal. He was looking at her. His gaze was not cold, not assessing. It was intense. It was a fire, hotter and brighter than the one burning between them. He did not speak. He lifted his hand, his fingers rough and calloused from a life of work and war. He moved it toward her face, so slowly, so deliberately, that she had 1,000 years to pull away. She saw the motion. She saw his intent, and she did not move. His fingers, surprisingly gentle, touched her chin. He did not touch the bruise. He did not touch her tears. He traced the small, silvery crescent of her scar. In your world, he said, his voice a low, rough sound that vibrated through her. Beauty is a silk dress. It is white skin and painted cheeks. It is a soft hand that has never known work. It is a fragile thing. It breaks. He leaned closer. His eyes held hers. In my world, beauty is different. His fingers moved from her scar, up her jawline, to the corner of her eye, and he brushed away a single tear. Here, he said, beauty is the heart that survives. It is the woman who is slapped and does not break. It is the spirit that is locked in the dark and still fights. Beauty is the hand that bleeds and still learns to make fire. It is the girl who rides into a sandstorm and does not fall. He was so close now she could feel his breath. It was warm. Your Eastern beauty is a lie, he whispered. It fades. It is useless. Your map this. He touched her scar again, so lightly it was barely a sensation. This is a mark of honor. It means you fell and you stood up. Your hands, they are the hands of a woman who is learning to live. This, he looked at her bruised, swollen cheek, and his eyes filled with a dark, dangerous fire. This is the mark of their shame, not yours. He pulled her, slowly, deliberately. His hand moved from her face to her arm, and he tugged gently. He was giving her the choice. He was giving her the time. She did not resist. She moved. She leaned. She fell into his strength. He pulled her close, his arm wrapping around her back, settling her against the hard, solid wall of his chest. He held her, his other hand still cupping her jaw. I look at you. Rose Parker, he said, his voice a raw vow in the small, warm cave. And I see no plainness. I see no cheap goods. I see a fire. I see a heart that beats back. To me you are Shinzo. You are beautiful. He paused, searching for the right words. You are my forever beauty, the kind that does not break. She looked up at him. Her tears stopped, her soul hanging suspended on his words. No one had ever said such a thing to her. No one. He lowered his head. Again, slowly. He was giving her every chance to turn away. She did not turn. She rose, meeting him. His lips touched hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not the chaste, dry kiss she had imagined in her girlhood dreams. It was a kiss of fire and stone. His mouth was firm and hot and demanding. It tasted of the wind, of smoke, and of a deep, male hunger that stunned her. He did not just kiss her mouth. He kissed her. He kissed the broken girl and the fierce survivor. His hand moved from her jaw. tangling in her wild, matted hair, holding her head as his mouth moved on hers. She gasped, and he took that as an invitation, deepening the kiss. Her hands, her raw, stinging hands, came up, not to push him away, but to cling to him. She grabbed the front of his shirt, her fingers knotting in the fabric. It was desperate. It was raw. It was a joining of two solitudes, two maps of scars. He was kissing her as if he was drinking water after a week in the desert, and she was kissing him back with all the pent-up hunger of a life spent starving. He broke the kiss, but only to move, to shift, to pull her fully against him, settling her in his lap. His arms wrapped around her like steel bands, all while still covered by the single, heavy blanket. He pressed his forehead against hers, his breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps. "Rose," he breathed, his eyes closed. "If you touch me," she whispered, her voice shaking, her body alive with 1,000 new, terrifying sensations. "If you do this, I will never want to leave you. I will never be able to go back." His eyes opened. They were dark, blazing pools of intent. "I am not Silas," he said, his voice rough. "I am not Holt. I am not touching goods. I am not touching a commodity." His hand slid down her back, pressing her hips against his, letting her feel the hard ridge of his own arousal. She gasped, her eyes wide. "I am touching a woman," he growled, his voice thick. "My woman, and I am binding your life to mine. If you do not want this, say it now." She looked at his mouth. She looked at his eyes. She thought of the cold, empty life in Ohio. She thought of the dark, terrifying storeroom. And she looked at the man who had called her beautiful. She did not say no. She lifted her head, and she kissed him. This time, there was no hesitation. It was a mutual claim. His mouth devoured hers. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her back, pulling her impossibly closer. Her own hands were just as desperate, her fingers digging into his shoulders, feeling the hard muscle beneath his shirt. He kissed her jaw, her throat, the burning, bruised skin of her cheek. His lips were a healing fire. She cried out, a small, keening sound as his mouth found the pulse at the base of her neck. He pulled back, just enough to look at her. His face was a mask of taut, controlled hunger. "You are sure?" he said. It was not a question. It was a final warning. She answered by fumbling with the ties of her deerskin dress, her hands clumsy, shaking. His eyes darkened. With a low groan, he helped her. The blanket pulled around their waists. The firelight bathed her skin in golden shadow. He looked at her, at the pale, soft skin of her shoulders, and he knew he was lost. He lowered his head, his lips tracing the line of her collarbone, moving toward the swell of her breast. Rose arched back, her head falling back, a sound ripping from her throat that was half fear and half pure, undeniable pleasure. His arms tightened, pulling her down into the soft bed of their shared blanket, into the warm, secret heart of the storm. The world outside roared, but in the cave, there was only the sound of the fire, and the rasp of breathing, and the whisper of skin against skin. When Rose awoke, it was to silence, the deep, profound silence of a world reborn. The wind was gone, the roaring had stopped. She was warm, she was wrapped in the wool blanket, and she was alone. For a panicked second, her heart seized. Then she saw him. Cain was standing at the mouth of the cave, looking out. The storm had passed. The air outside was washed clean, the sky a brilliant, pale blue. The sand was gone, leaving the red rock gleaming, wet and new. He had his shirt back on, but his vest was gone. He turned, hearing her stir. Their eyes met, a wave of heat, of memory, of shame, and of something fierce and new, washed over Rose. She clutched the blanket to her chest. He did not smile, but the harsh lines of his face were softer. He looked at her, his gaze lingering, warm and possessive. He was not looking at a stranger. He was not looking at a burden. She was happy, and she was terrified. What had she done? What had he done? A free man, a warrior. tying himself to a girl with a $200 bounty on her head, a girl who was, by the laws of his enemy, a piece of runaway property. "The storm is over," he said, his voice quiet. "Yes," she whispered. They walked back into the valley side by side. They did not touch, they did not speak, but the space between them was charged, a visible, tangible thing. Naomi was the first to see them. She was repegging a shelter wall that had come loose. She looked up as they approached. She saw her brother. She saw the white girl. And she saw, instantly, that everything had changed. She saw the way Rose looked at him, her eyes wide and full of a terrified, dawning hope. She saw the way Cain walked, not in front of her, but beside her. She saw the way his eyes kept straying to her, a small, protective flick of his gaze. When they passed, Naomi let out a slow breath. A part of her was happy. Her brother, who had been a ghost for so long, looked alive, but a deeper part of her was cold with fear. She walked over to Rose later that day, as Rose was awkwardly attempting to rebraid her tangled hair. "So," Naomi said, her voice flat, "it is done." Rose flushed, her hands stilling. Naomi sat down, taking the hair from Rose's clumsy fingers. Her own hands were quick and strong. "Do you know what you have done? White girl, you have taken his freedom." "What? No." "I did not." "He was a ghost," Naomi said, her voice low as she expertly sectioned the hair. "He moved between worlds. He was impossible to catch because he belonged nowhere. He had nothing to lose." She pulled the braid tight. "Now, he has you. A man with something to lose is a man who can be trapped. He is a man who can be killed." She tied off the braid, "Loving a warrior like my brother. Rose is not safe. You have not saved yourself. You have just given Holt a new, sharper knife to gut you both with." The words were cold, hard, and true. They struck at the very heart of Rose's fragile new happiness. The dread was confirmed 2 days later. The scout returned from his watch. He did not ride in. He ran, his horse lathered. "Bounty hunters," he announced to the camp. "Not Holt's cowboys. Not the deputy. A real team. I am from Texas, 4 of them. They are well armed. They look like they know how to fight Apaches. They are asking questions in Dust Creek about a warrior and a white girl. They are picking up the trail." A new, cold silence fell over the camp. This was not a posse of drunken cowboys. This was a professional hunting party. Old Bear rose slowly from his place by the fire. He walked to the center of the camp. He lit a bundle of sage, letting the sacred, cleansing smoke rise into the clean air. He held his hands in the smoke and then turned to Cain and Rose, who stood side by side. He wafted the smoke over them, his eyes closed, his lips moving in an ancient prayer. When he finished, he opened his eyes. They were clear and sad. "It is as I feared," he said, his voice quiet. "When 2 souls rap together, the storm outside will seek every way to tear that join. It is coming." The news of the Texas bounty hunters settled over the small valley like a shroud. Every shadow seemed longer. Every snap of a twig made people jump. The camp, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. They posted extra lookouts, Taza and his warriors moving through the high rocks, their faces grim. The women worked in silence, and the children were kept close, their usual games forbidden. Rose felt the weight of every stare. She was the $200 prize. She was the reason the wolves were coming. She worked harder than ever, tending the horses, grinding corn. Her hands now calloused and tough, but she felt invisible. People looked at her, but they saw a bounty, a curse. Only Cain treated her as he had before. He was quiet, watchful, but his gaze held the same possessive warmth. He continued her lessons with the rifle, but added a new one, a small, heavy Colt revolver. "The rifle is for distance," he said, his voice low, his hands guiding hers to the proper grip. "This is for when they are too close. It is not for aiming. It is for pointing. You point at the man, and you pull the trigger until he falls. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered, the weight of the gun terrifying. "Do not think," he commanded. "You think, you die. You feel the threat, and you act." That night, Rose could not sleep. She lay in the small, separate wickiup Naomi had given her, listening to the night sounds, She heard the wind, the call of an owl, the soft stamp of the horses. A false peace had settled over the camp. The moon was high and full, bathing the canyon in cold, silver light. It was beautiful, and it was terrible. It made the valley a perfect target. She must have dozed, because the first sound that registered was not a sound at all. It was the sudden, terrified scream of a horse. Then the world exploded. A shot, then another, then a volley of gunfire, the cracks echoing off the canyon walls. A man shouted, not in Apache, but in a thick Texas drawl. Down in the bowl, light 'em up. Boys. A wickiup near the stream burst into flames, a flask of oil or whiskey thrown onto its dry brush. In the sudden, hellish light, Rose saw them 4 men on horseback, rifles blazing, charging into the heart of the quiet camp. Rose scrambled out of her shelter, the small revolver clutched in her hand. The air was filled with smoke, the smell of gunpowder, and screams. A woman ran past, her hair on fire, and Naomi tackled her, rolling her in the dirt to smother the flames. Cain was already moving. His rifle in hand, he was not a man anymore. He was a force of nature. He roared in his own language. A command, not a cry of fear. Naomi Rose, he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The high rocks, get the women and children to the high rocks, go now! He did not wait to see. He turned, dropped to one knee, and fired his rifle. One of the riders, who had been aiming at a child, grunted and clutched his chest, falling sideways from his horse. This was it. Rose's mind went blank, her limbs frozen. This was not a fist fight in a saloon. This was a slaughter. This was what war looked like. The flashes of the rifles, the dark, running shapes, the terrible wet sound of bullets hitting flesh. Move! Naomi screamed, grabbing Rose's arm, yanking her from her paralysis. Naomi had a child in her other arm and was pushing an old woman in front of her. They ran, half crawling, toward the back of the valley, toward the steep, rocky cliffs that offered the only real cover. A bullet whined past Rose's ear. So close, she felt its heat. She did not scream. She did not have the air. Taza and the other warriors were fighting back. Taza himself was perched on a rock, his own rifle flashing, providing cover fire for the retreating families. But the Texans were good. They were not drunken cowboys. They were professionals. They dismounted, using the rocks and the burning shelters for cover, moving with a terrifying, practiced efficiency. They reached the base of the cliffs. The women and children scrambled up a narrow path, disappearing into the shadows. Go! Naomi shoved Rose toward the path, but Rose looked back. Cain was fighting, a shadow among shadows, his rifle speaking a deadly language. One of the bounty hunters, a huge man with a long beard, saw her. He saw her in the full, treacherous moonlight. There he bellowed, his voice triumphant. The white girl, I see her. The $200 girl, she is mine. He was between her and the rocks. He abandoned the firefight, his eyes locked on her, a wide grin splitting his dirty face. He saw his prize. He lunged for her, grabbing a fistful of her hair, yanking her off her feet. Got you. You little prairie bitch, he laughed, pulling her against his chest, using her as a shield. Holt pays full for you. He put a pistol to her head. The cold, round circle of the muzzle against her temple was the end of the world. She screamed, and then she remembered. Do not think. You feel the threat, and you act. She was still holding the revolver. Her hand was shaking so violently she could barely feel it. He was laughing, dragging her backward toward his horse. She did not aim. She did not think. She pressed the muzzle of the revolver into his side, into his thick, soft belly, and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening, muffled by his body. The man's laughter stopped. He made a sound, a deep, surprised oof. His grip on her hair loosened. He looked down at his side, a look of profound, stupid confusion on his face. Why, you, he gasped. She pulled the trigger again, and again. He grunted, his body spasming. He released her, stumbling backward. He was still on his feet, but his eyes were wide, the fight gone from them. He looked at her, no longer a prize, but a person. He tried to raise his pistol, but his arm was too heavy. He collapsed, falling face down into the dirt. Rose stood there, the heavy revolver smoking in her hand. Her ears were ringing. She could not breathe. She had done it. She had killed a man. A shadow moved, and she shrieked, raising the gun. Rose. It was Naomi. She was holding a long knife, its blade dark. We must go. Now Naomi grabbed her and pulled her up the path. Rose's legs were water. She scrambled on her hands and knees, the empty revolver still clutched in her hand. From below, the battle was turning. The Texans had lost the element of surprise, and now 2 of their numbers were down. The remaining 2 were in a full firefight with Cain and Taza. A cry went up, not from a man, but from a child, the boy Naomi had been carrying. Her nephew had been hit. A stray bullet had grazed his arm, and he was bleeding, his cries thin and terrified. Naomi took one look, her face a mask of stone. She ripped a piece of her own dress, binding the wound. She looked at Rose, who was staring, paralyzed, at the blood. "This is what they bring," Naomi said, her voice a low, vicious hiss. "This is the world of white men." Below, the 2 remaining bounty hunters realized the fight was lost. They were outnumbered and outpositioned. "Fall back," one of them yelled. "We are done here. We got one of them, and we know where they are. Let's go." They grabbed the reins of their fallen comrades' horses, fired a final volley to cover their escape, and then they were gone, their horses' hooves pounding, fading into the night. The silence that descended was worse than the noise. It was thick, heavy, and filled with the smell of blood, smoke, and burnt hair. Dawn found a broken valley. The wickiup was a pile of smoking ash. The body of the bounty hunter Rose had shot lay in the dirt, a magnet for flies. The other one, the man Cain had shot, was slumped over a rock, but they had not escaped without cost. Taza was kneeling over the body of his younger brother, a boy of no more than 17. He had been hit in the first volley. He was dead. Taza was not weeping. He was rocking back and forth, his face carved from granite, a low, animal sound of grief and rage building in his chest. The child Naomi had saved was crying, his arm throbbing. Old Bear was tending to him, his face grim. Rose sat by herself, her back against a rock, her hands scraped raw, the empty revolver on the ground beside her. She was staring at the body of the man she had killed. She felt nothing. She was hollowed out, a clean, empty vessel. Then the guilt came. It filled the emptiness, a tide of black, suffocating oil, the dead boy, the crying child, the burned home, Taza's agony. "This is my fault," she whispered, her voice a dry croak. "I brought this. I am the curse." Old Bear finished with the child's arm. He walked slowly over to her. He did not look at the dead man. He looked at her. "You brought nothing," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The storm was already here. The sickness was already in the air. "But they came for me," she insisted, her voice breaking. "The bounty, $200. They came for the gold," Old Bear said, his eyes distant. "And they came for the land. And they came because our skin is red. They have been coming for 50 years. You are not the sickness, child. You are just a symptom. You are the mirror in which Holt sees his own greedy, ugly face." He looked down at the dead man. "You did what a warrior does. You survived. Do not be ashamed of the blood you spill. Be ashamed of the blood you do not have the courage to spill when your life is on the line." His words cut through her guilt, but they did not erase it. Later, as they were preparing the body of Taza's brother for burial, the inevitable confrontation came. Taza strode into the center of the grieving camp, his face a mask of cold fury. He walked directly to Cain. "This is done," Taza said, his voice low and deadly. "We buried my brother. We will not bury any more for her." He jabbed a finger at Rose. "She fought," Cain said, his voice equally low. "She killed one of them. She drew them." Taza exploded. "They came for her. They will be back. And next time, they will bring Holt, and they will bring the soldiers. We cannot fight the whole white army for your new pet." "She is not my pet," Cain said, stepping forward. his body radiating a quiet, dangerous energy. "She is a white woman," Taza shouted. "She is a sack of gold. Get rid of her, send her out, let them have her. Our survival is more important than your lust." The camp went silent. The accusation was a deep, terrible insult. Cain looked at Taza, and for a second, Rose thought he would kill him. Instead, he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the small valley. "You are wrong. Taza," he said, "you think this is about her. You think if she is gone, we will be safe. You are a fool." He turned, addressing all of them. "Holt does not just want her. He wants this valley. He wants this water. He wants us dead or gone. He has wanted it for 10 years. She is just his excuse. If we send her away, do you think he will thank us? Do you think he will leave us in peace? No, he will see it as weakness. He will roll over us. Running and hiding is finished. It has only brought us death." Rose felt a new strength flow into her. She was not the hollowed-out girl from the morning. She was the woman Old Bear had spoken to. She stood up, her legs shaking, but she stood. She walked from the rocks and stood, not behind Cain, but next to him. She faced Taza. "He is right," she said, her voice clear, though it trembled. "But I will not be the death of you. I will not be your burden. If you want me to go, I will go. I will walk out of this valley myself. I will give myself up. But I will not be the reason any more children are hurt." Taza looked at her, his expression unreadable. Cain did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Taza, and he reached out, his hand finding hers, lacing his fingers through hers. He did it in front of the entire camp. It was a claim. It was a vow. "She stays," Cain said, his voice final. "She is not a white girl I saved. She fought for this camp. She bled for it. She is one of us now, and we do not abandon our own." He squeezed her hand, a hard, brief pressure. "We do not run. We fight. We take the battle to him. We use his own laws, his own world, against him." A murmur went through the crowd. This was new. This was not the Apache way of hiding. This was the white man's way of war. Later that night, after the burial was done and a heavy, exhausted peace settled, Cain came to her. He was holding her old valise, the one she had thought lost, the one he must have salvaged from the mercantile after they fled. "Your things," he said. "I did not look through them, but you did." What she was confused. "The letters. From Edgar Thorne. Yeah, I still have them." "Why, he was a fool," Cain said, "but he was a white fool. He understood the paper. Did he send you anything else? Any other papers? A legal document? A map? A deed?" Rose's mind flashed back. She had been so focused on the marriage proposal, the letters that promised a new life. But there was something else. Tucked into the Bible, a piece of heavy paper, folded many times. It was full of words she did not understand, lines and numbers. "Yes," she said, her heart suddenly pounding. "I think so. A paper." It looked like something from a bank. She ran to her wiki-up. She fumbled in the dark, her hands finding the valise. She pulled out her mother's Bible, and there, tucked between the pages of Genesis, was the paper. She brought it out to the firelight. Cain took it. He was not a scholar of English, but he could read. He unfolded the paper. He read the legal description. He read the boundaries. His eyes scanned the map, drawn by a government surveyor. He went still. "What?" Rose asked, her voice tight with fear. "What is it?" "This land," he said, his finger tracing a line on the map. "I know this place. It is a canyon, 2 miles north of Dust Creek. It is small, but it is spring, a deep one. It never runs dry. He left me a piece of land. He left you the one piece of land Cyrus Holt has been trying to get for 5 years," Cain said, his voice a low, stunned whisper. "It is the only water source in that entire basin that is not on Holt's land. It controls the entire northern pasture. Without it, his herds cannot expand." He looked up at her, his dark eyes blazing with a new, terrifying light. The final piece of the puzzle had just snapped into place. "He does not want you just because you are a witness," Cain said. "He wants you dead because you are an owner. This paper is your death warrant." "And," he said, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face, I think it is also our gun. The paper, it was a weapon. But a weapon, Kane knew, was useless unless one knew how to wield it. They gathered in the cold pre-dawn light, the small, core group of survivors. Kane, Rose, Naomi, and Taza, whose face was a mask of grief and frozen rage. Old Bear stood apart, watching. He has a meeting, Kane said, his voice flat. The scout he had sent out, the one who brought the news of the bounty hunters, had also brought this in 3 days. A United States Marshal is coming from Santa Fe, along with a man from the railroad. Holt wants to finalize the new land survey. He wants to prove to them that the territory is pacified, that it is safe for the railroad to expand, and that he is the man to oversee it. So, he will hunt us, Taza said, his voice dead. He will kill us all to show the white marshal how pacified his land is. No, Kane said. He looked at Taza. He will try, but we will not be hiding. We will be there. Taza stared at him as if he were insane. Go to Dust Creek to the saloon. It is a trap. He has 10, maybe 15, paid guns in that town. We have 4 warriors left and a white woman. We have more, Kane said, tapping the folded deed in his shirt. We have his law. The marshal is not Cyrus Holt. He is a federal man. He believes in paper. He believes in witnesses. The railroad man believes in money. And he will not want his new line built on a foundation of murder and stolen land. It is bad for business. The plan was audacious. It was desperate. It was, Rose realized, the only path that was not simple. Slow extermination. We go to Dust Creek, Kane said. Taza, you and the men will move along the high ridges. You will enter the town from the east, unseen. You will watch the saloon. You will be my rifle. He turned to Naomi. You will go with her. And what Naomi said, her voice sharp. Serve them drinks. You will enter the saloon as you always do, as servants. As women they do not see, you will find a place. You will wait, finally. He looked at Rose. His gaze was heavy, searching. The moment Cyrus Holt begins his speech, the moment he has the marshal and the railroad man listening, you will walk in. Rose's blood turned to ice. Walk in. You will not hide. You will not disguise yourself. You will walk in, and you will show them this paper. You will tell your story. You will be the witness. You will tell them you saw him murder a man. You will tell them he put a bounty on your head. You will tell them he has been trying to steal this land. Your land. He took her chin in his hand, his grip firm, forcing her to meet his eyes. You are his law. Rose, you are the white woman they will listen to. You are the mirror Old Bear spoke of, and you will show them his true face. It was, she thought, the most terrifying thing he could have asked. To ride into a sandstorm, to fire a gun at a man that was instinct. This was a choice. To walk, willingly, into the den of the man who had ordered her death. I cannot, she whispered, her body shaking. Yes, you can, Kane said, his voice absolute. You are the girl who killed a man to save her own life. You are the one who faced me in the cave and called me your own. You are my forever beauty. Now, you will be my warrior. Taza looked at her, his eyes filled with contempt and a new, grudging curiosity. She will fail. She will scream and run. Rose looked at Taza, at his grief-stricken face. She looked at Naomi, who was watching her, not with hate, but with a terrible, cold pity. And she looked at Kane, who was not asking, but commanding. He was betting all their lives on her. I will not fail, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I will not run. The journey was a new kind of hell. They left the next night, moving only in the darkness. A small, desperate band. They rode for 2 nights, crossing the high desert. The days were spent hiding in narrow canyons. The sun beating down. The horses suffering from lack of water. Rose's body, already pushed to its limit, screamed. Her muscles were liquid fire. Her hands were cracked and bleeding, and her mouth was so dry it felt full of cotton. But she did not complain. She rode beside Kane, her back straight. When they had to dismount and lead the horses over a sheer rockfall, Her legs trembled, but she did not fall. She proved her strength not with words, but with endurance. She was no longer the girl from Ohio. She was a woman of this land, as tough and as unforgiving as the rock itself. On the third morning, an hour before dawn, they stood on the ridge overlooking Dust Creek. The town was a scatter of dark squares, the only light coming from the Last Chance Saloon, which, as its name implied, never closed. Kane gave his final orders. Taza, you know your positions. The livery roof, the alley across from the saloon. Do not fire unless I give the signal, or unless they lay a hand on her. Taza nodded. A single, sharp movement, and he and the other two warriors melted into the shadows. Kane turned to Naomi and Rose. He had given them different clothes. They were not Apache, not white. They were the drab, shapeless dresses of Mexican washerwomen, with dark shawls to cover their heads and faces. They will see you as servants, Kane said, his voice a low growl. They will not even look at you. It is your armor. Go, find the kitchen. Act as if you belong. And wait. Naomi nodded, her face grim. She pulled the shawl over her dark hair. Kane looked at Rose. He wanted to touch her. He wanted to pull her to him, to tell her to be safe, to kiss her one last time. He did none of those things. He just looked at her. Do not be afraid of the fire. Rose, be the fire. He touched her hand, his fingers briefly lacing with hers. His skin was hot. Then he, too, was gone, vanishing into the darkness toward the back of the saloon. Rose and Naomi walked down the hill, two anonymous shadows. They entered the town, their feet stirring the dust. The town was asleep. They circled to the back of the saloon. A cook was already there, splitting firewood. He glanced at them. You are late, he grumbled, assuming they were the day's help. Get in there. They will want coffee in an hour. They slipped inside, into the heat and the smell of stale beer, sawdust, and old grease. The main saloon was empty, save for a swamper sweeping up. They found the small, filthy kitchen and began to heat water. Their movements slow, their heads down, their shawls hiding their faces. They were invisible. For 2 hours, they waited. The town woke up. The saloon began to fill. Rose's heart hammered so hard she was sure it could be heard over the clatter of pots. At 10 o'clock, they arrived. Cyrus Holt entered, not through the front doors, but from his office. He was wearing a new silk vest, a deep purple, and a clean white shirt. He was smiling, a picture of the benevolent patriarch. With him were 2 men. One was older, with a gray mustache and a weary, skeptical face. He wore a star on his vest. This was Marshal Davies. The other was a younger man from the East, his suit too fine for this country, his face eager. He was a railroad man, and you see, Marshal. Cyrus was booming, his voice filling the room. We have established true order. The renegades have been pushed back. The land is pacified. It is ready for progress, ready for the steel rails that will connect this great territory to the nation. He led them to the largest table in the room, which had been set for them. His paid guns, the men from the saloon, were scattered, watching, their hands near their holsters. They were the order Cyrus was talking about. Naomi nudged Rose. Now. Naomi picked up the heavy coffee pot. Rose picked up a tray of clean glasses. They kept their heads down. They walked from the kitchen into the main saloon. Rose's body was moving, but her mind was screaming. I cannot! She saw the back of Cyrus Holt's thick neck. She saw the marshal. She saw the guns. She passed Taza's position. Through the window, she saw the glint of his rifle barrel on the roof of the livery stable. She was not alone. They reached the table. Coffee, gentlemen, Naomi said, her voice subservient, her accent perfect. As she poured, Rose set down the glasses. Her hands were shaking so badly, the glasses rattled on the tray. Cyrus Holt glanced at her, annoyed by the sound. He saw a clumsy Mexican girl. He did not see her face. He turned back to the marshal. This is the future, sir, Cyrus said, spreading a large map on the table. And I am the man to guarantee it. This was it. Rose set the tray down. She stood up straight, and she pulled the shawl from her head. Her pale face, her plain brown hair. and the magnificent, terrible bruise that still marked her cheek were revealed in the morning light. "He is not," Rose said, her voice clear and strong. It cut through the saloon like a clean, sharp knife. The room went dead. The piano player stopped. The marshal froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Cyrus Holt's head swiveled. He looked at her. His eyes, which had been jovial, went perfectly flat. His face began to drain of color. He did not recognize her. Not for a second. "Who in the hell are you?" he demanded. "My name is Rose Parker," she said, her voice gaining strength. She looked not at Cyrus, but at the marshal. "I am from Ohio. I came here to marry Mr. Edgar Thorne." "Edgar," the marshal said, his brow furrowing. "He died months ago." "Girl, I know," Rose said, "but his brother, Silas, let me come anyway, because I was prime goods." A low murmur went through the saloon. Silas, who was standing by the bar, turned a sickly gray. "I am the legal holder of Edgar Thorne's last will and correspondence," Rose said. She reached into her dress and pulled out the packet of letters. "And the deed." She placed them on the marshal's table, on top of Cyrus's map. "And I am the legal owner of the Spring Creek parcel. This land." She pointed to the deed. Cyrus Holt finally understood. His face went from white to a deep, apoplectic purple. "This is insane. She is a liar, a whore. She ran off with that murdering Indian, Cain Blackwind." "He is not a murderer," Rose said, her voice ringing with a pure, righteous fury. "But you are—" The marshal stood up. "What did you say?" Girl Rose pointed a shaking finger at Cyrus Holt. "I say that I was in his office. I saw him shoot an unarmed cowboy in the chest, a young man who was only asking for his pay, $80. He murdered him. And I saw it. The saloon erupted." "She is lying," Cyrus roared. "She is a savage's whore, if I am lying," Rose cried, her voice rising over the din. "Then why did he lock me in a storeroom? Why did he put a bounty on my head, $200 for me? Alive. $100 for Cain Blackwind. Dead. Because I'm a witness. Because he wanted my land. He sent 4 bounty hunters to kill us. They attacked our camp. A child was shot. A boy was murdered." She was screaming now. All her terror, all her rage, all her grief, pouring out of her. Caesar Cyrus bellowed at his men, "Shut that lying bitch up now." 2 of his gunmen, who had been standing by the door, drew their revolvers and lunged for her. The window to the left of the bar exploded, a single rifle shot. One of the gunmen grabbed his chest, a look of surprise on his face, and fell. It was Taza. The signal. The saloon doors burst open. Cain Blackwind stood there, not in buckskin, but in a simple shirt, his rifle in his hand. "Marshal," he said, his voice calm. "It seems you have a choice to make." All hell broke loose. Cyrus's men opened fire. Cain ducked back, firing as he moved. The marshal and the railroad man dove behind the heavy oak bar. "Do not shoot!" the marshal yelled, his voice lost in the thunder of guns. A gunman leveled his pistol at Rose. Before he could fire, a knife, thrown from the kitchen, embedded itself in his throat. He gurgled, dropping his gun. Naomi stood in the kitchen doorway, her face a mask of terrible, beautiful rage. Cyrus was not a fool. He knew the fight was lost. His only thought was to silence the witness. He ignored Cain. He ignored his men. He pulled his own heavy revolver from under his vest and leveled it at Rose. "You," he screamed. "You are dead." He was 10 feet from her. There was no missing. Rose Cain roared. Time stopped. Rose saw the black round hole of the revolver. She saw Cyrus's finger tighten. Cain launched himself, not at Cyrus, but at her. He hit her with his full body weight. A brutal, saving tackle. He knocked her to the floor just as Cyrus fired. The bullet, meant for her heart, tore through Cain's left shoulder. He grunted. A sharp, ragged sound of impact. But his own rifle was already coming up. He was falling, but he was firing. He pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Cyrus Holt square in the chest. The big man staggered back, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked down at the red stain spreading on his purple vest. He looked at Cain, who was on the floor. He looked at Rose. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out.
He stumbled backward, his momentum carrying him. He hit the main saloon window, the one that looked out onto the street. The glass shattered, exploding outward. Cyrus Holt fell through the frame, his arms flailing, and crashed onto the wooden boardwalk. He lay there, in the bright morning sun, for all of Dust Creek to see, his blood pooling in the red dust. The saloon went silent. The only sound was the tinkling of broken glass. The marshal slowly stood up from behind the bar, his own gun in his hand. He looked at the dead gunman. He looked at the man with the knife in his throat. He looked at Taza, who was now visible on the roof opposite. He looked at Cyrus Holt, lying dead in the street. And he looked at Rose, who was scrambling toward Kane. Kane, she screamed. He was on the floor, his back against a tipped-over table, his face pale. His shoulder was a ruin of blood. But he was alive. His eyes were open, and they were fixed on her. You were the fire," he whispered, his voice a pained rasp. She fell to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over the terrible wound. "Oh God, Kane, you are hurt. It is just a map," he breathed, a small, pained smile touching his lips. She grabbed his hand, the one that was not covered in blood, and held it to her cheek. She was crying, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of a terrible, painful victory. She looked up, at the marshal, at the railroad man, at the shocked, silent faces of the town. She was no longer a victim. She was not a witness. She was not a sack of gold. She was Rose Parker Blackwind, and the fight had just begun. Marshal Davies took control of the saloon with the weary authority of a man who had seen too much and was paid too little. He held a bloody handkerchief to his own head, where a piece of flying glass had grazed him. "Nobody leaves," he said, his voice a low growl that cut through the shocked silence. He looked at the dead men, at the shattered window, at the body of Cyrus Holt lying on the boardwalk, a crowd already gathering at a safe distance. Rose was oblivious. She was on her knees, her hands frantic, trying to staunch the flow of blood from Kane's shoulder. It was dark, arterial blood, and it was pumping, not flowing. "He needs a doctor," she cried, looking up at the marshal, her face a mask of his blood and her own tears. "He is bleeding to death. He will get one." "Ma'am," the marshal said. He pointed at two of Holt's men, who stood with their hands half raised, their faces pale and uncertain. "You two, put your weapons on the table, slowly. You are now in my custody." The railroad man, pale as a sheet, was leaning against the bar. "This is not an order. This is savagery. My investors, your investors," Marshal Davies snapped, "are lucky they are not hanging from a rope. They were in business with a murderer. Now, stay quiet." Taza and Naomi entered from their positions, their weapons still hot. Taza's gaze was complex. He looked at Holt's dead body, then at the dead gunman, then at Kane, who was groaning, his teeth gritted. Finally, he looked at Rose. He did not speak. "We have to move him," Naomi said, kneeling, her voice all business. She ripped a clean tablecloth, ignoring the protests of the bartender. "The town doctor is Holt's man. He will poison him. He must go to Old Bear. I cannot let him be moved," the marshal said, walking over. "He is a material witness." "Well, he shot a man. Several, it seems." Rose stood up, her small body vibrating with a fury that made the tall marshal take a half-step back. "He shot men who were trying to murder me. You saw it. He just saved your life. He saved my life. If he stays here, he will die. Is that your law, to let the man who saved you die? While the man who tried to kill you gets a trial, he needs his own people. Now," the marshal looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, at the blood on her dress. He looked at Kane, who was fading, his eyes half closed. He looked at the deed she had placed on the table. He was a practical man. He made a decision. "All right," he said, letting out a long breath. "Get him out of here. I was never good at battlefield medicine. But you, ma'am," he pointed at Rose, "and you," he pointed at Naomi. "I am going to need your official testimony. My deputy will find you. This whole town is now a federal matter. He will not survive the ride.
Taza said, his voice flat. He was looking at the wound. We will not ride, Naomi said. We will carry him. The journey back to the hidden valley was a slow, agonizing procession. They made a travois, a simple stretcher, and Taza and another warrior pulled it, their steps measured and gentle. Rose walked beside it, her hand never leaving Cain's. He was burning with fever, his consciousness slipping in and out. She fed him water from her own canteen. She bathed his face. She whispered to him, telling him he was not allowed to die, that she had not come this far to lose him now. They arrived 2 days later. Old Bear took one look at the wound and his face went grim. It was black at the edges, and the smell was one of sickness. The bullet was deep, and it was lodged against the bone. For 2 days, Cain lay in the wickiup, hovering in the gray space between life and death. Old Bear worked, chanting, applying poultices, and finally, using his long, thin knife to probe the wound and extract the flattened piece of lead. Rose never left. She sat in the small, smoky shelter, her own body exhausted, her mind a taut wire of prayer. She was no longer a victim. She was a nurse. She was a guardian. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Cain woke, his eyes clear but hollowed. He saw her, sitting in the shadows, her face pale with exhaustion, and a small, weak smile touched his lips. The peace lasted less than an hour. A shout, the sound of a horse, ridden too hard, plunging into the valley. It was one of the young men Taza had posted as a lookout. "Riders," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "Holt's men. A dozen of them. They are coming fast. They are burning the outer pastures." Rose ran from the wickiup. The valley, which had been so quiet, was in chaos. The men who had been left behind were running for their rifles. Women were grabbing their children. The deputy, Blevins, he had been Holt's man all along. Now that Holt was dead, Blevins and the dozen paid guns who were suddenly unemployed were taking what they believed was theirs. They were not bounty hunters. They were a pack of wolves, coming to tear the carcass. They burst over the ridge, not in a disciplined line, but as a howling mob, their rifles blazing. They were not trying to capture anyone. This was a raid of pure, vindictive destruction. "They are setting fire to the food stores," a woman screamed. Taza, who had been organizing the defense, saw Blevins and 3 other men ride hard for the horse herd, cutting them out, taking their only means of escape. But Blevins was not just after horses. He saw the women and children huddled by the rocks, the place where they had hidden before. He grinned, and he and 2 men changed direction. It was a snatch, a way to gain leverage. They rode into the screaming group, grabbing hostages. They seized Taza's own young son and another woman's daughter. They grabbed a young woman named Little Fawn. They scooped them up, laughing, and wheeled their horses around. It was over in 5 minutes. A cloud of smoke from the burning stores. The remaining horses scattered, and the raiders were gone. Back over the ridge, whooping and firing in the air. They had taken 3 hostages. Rose ran back to Cain. He had pulled himself up onto one elbow, his face a mask of white-hot pain and fury. He had his revolver in his good hand. "They are gone," Rose said, her voice dead. "They have children. Taza's son." Cain let his head fall back. He had saved no one. Taza and Naomi ran in. "We are going after them," Taza said, his voice a low, deadly growl. He was checking his rifle. "I am coming," Rose said, picking up the rifle Cain had given her. "No," Naomi said. "You stay. He needs you." Rose looked at Cain, his face pale, his shoulder bleeding anew from the strain. Her heart tore. She wanted to stay. She was a nurse. She was his. "Rose," Cain whispered, his voice a raw rasp. She knelt by him, taking his hand. "I will not leave you. Old Bear needs help." He grabbed her wrist, his good hand surprisingly strong. His eyes were burning. "Hatch Blevins. Whoever he is, he has them. He has Taza's son." He looked at her, his gaze pinning her. If you stay here to bathe my head, you are not the woman I thought you were. You will sit here, and you will die of guilt. You will hate me for making you weak." "I cannot," she sobbed.
her heart breaking. "Yes, you can," he commanded. "This is your path now. You are one of us. Go, fight with them. That is your life. That is our life. Go!" He pushed her hand away. She looked at him, at this man who was sending her away, sending her into danger, because he knew her, because he saw her. She stood up. She wiped the tears from her face, leaving a streak of dirt. She turned to Taza, her back straight. Which way did they go? Taza looked at her, his expression of contempt gone, replaced by a deep, grudging respect. He nodded. "Once. They ride for the high rocks. They think to hole up in the canyons. Let's go." They rode, Rose, Naomi, Taza, and 2 other warriors, 5 of them, against a dozen. Rose was not a clumsy rider anymore. She was part of the pursuit, her body moving with the horse, the rifle a familiar weight in her hands. They found the trail. It was wide and easy to follow. "Too easy. He is trying to lead us into a trap," Taza said, reining in. The trail led into a narrow, winding canyon. "No," Rose said, dismounting. She walked to the ground, her eyes scanning Cain's lessons. "What does the earth tell you? He is not," she said, her voice quiet, certain. She pointed. "Look, the tracks are deep. These horses are tired. They are carrying doubles. They are not setting a trap. They are running." And she walked further, kneeling. "This one, Blevins. His horse has a loose shoe. It is striking the rock. I can hear it in my head." Taza knelt beside her. He looked at the mark. He looked at her. "You have his eyes. Let's go," she said, swinging back onto her horse, before they hurt them. While they rode, the law was moving. In Dust Creek, Marshal Davies had set up a new office in the ruined saloon. He had Silas Thorne, who was weeping and talking, telling the marshal everything, the land grab, the fake letters, the years of murder and graft. The marshal made 3 decisions. First, he said to the shaken railroad man, "By authority of the United States government, I am seizing all of Cyrus Holt's assets to pay his debts to this territory, and to the people he wronged, his cattle, his land, his banknotes. It is all forfeit." Second, he held up Rose's deed. "This parcel, Spring Creek, is legally the property of Miss Rose Parker. It is exempt from the seizure. It is hers, free and clear." And third, he said, looking at Old Bear, who had come in under a flag of truce to give testimony, "I am taking an official, sworn statement from the Mescalero people about every crime Holt committed against you. His reign is over. The law is back. The law was slow. Vengeance was fast. Rose and her group found them in a box canyon, just as she had predicted. Blevins and his men were cornered. They had the hostages tied in the open." "That is far enough," Taza Blevins yelled, his voice echoing. "We know who you are. We want $5,000 and safe passage. Or we start with the boy." He put his gun to Taza's son's head. The boy, terrified, made a break for it. He was only 6. He twisted out of the man's grasp and ran, not toward Taza, but toward the side of the canyon, blind with panic. One of Blevins's men laughed and raised his rifle. "Run, little rabbit." The boy did not see the cliff edge. He was running, and then he was gone. A scream, not from the boy, but from his mother. Back in the camp. No, he was there. He was clinging to a small, gnarled root, dangling over a 50-foot drop, his small legs kicking in the empty air. The world froze. Taza raised his rifle, but Blevins had his gun on him. Naomi was aiming at another man. It was a perfect, deadly triangle. Rose did not have a target. She only saw the boy. She was running. She was not a warrior. She was not a nurse. She was just a woman, and a child was falling. She threw herself flat on the loose gravel, sliding the last few feet. She heard a bullet sing past her ear as Blevin's man fired at Taza, and Taza fired back. The canyon erupted in gunfire. Rose ignored it. She was at the edge. "Take my hand," she screamed. The boy was crying, his small fingers white on the root. "I am slipping." Rose hooked her boots on a rock, leaning her entire upper body over the void. She grabbed his wrist. It was thin and slick with sweat. "I have you," she grunted. She pulled. The gravel slid under her chest. She was slipping, too. A shadow fell over her.
One of Blevins' men, his face a mask of rage, was above her, his rifle butt raised to smash her skull. He never brought it down, a blur of motion, and Naomi was there, her long knife burying itself in his back. He fell, tumbling over the edge, his scream fading into the canyon. Rose gave one last, desperate, agonizing pull. She scraped her chest and arms raw on the rock, but she hauled the boy up, over the edge. She rolled, covering him with her own body. As bullets chipped the stone around them, the fight was short, brutal, and over. Taza and his men, freed from the standoff, were deadly. In 30 seconds, it was done. All of Blevins' men were down. Except Blevins. He had the woman, Little Fawn, his arm around her throat, his revolver to her temple. "I walk," he screamed, his eyes wild. His plan in ruins. "I walk, or she dies. I am not joking." He was backing away, dragging her, his eyes darting between Taza, Naomi, and Rose. They all had their guns on him, but the shot was impossible. "Let her go. Blevins," Taza said, his voice a low growl. "You shut up," Blevins shrieked. "It is your fault, Holt's fault, I'm walking out of here." A sound, a single rifle shot. It did not come from the canyon floor. It came from the ridge, high above. It was a clean, perfect sound. Blevins froze. His eyes went wide. A small, neat hole appeared in the center of his forehead. His arm went limp. He collapsed like a sack of grain. Little Fawn ran, screaming, to Taza. Rose, Naomi, and Taza, as one, looked up. He was there, a silhouette against the bright, blue sky. He was pale as death, his left arm bound to his chest in a bloody sling. But he was standing. He was leaning on his rifle, using it as a crutch. His horse stood patiently behind him. Cane Black Wind. He had followed them. He had climbed the high ridge, bleeding, half dead, to make the last shot. The shadow of Cyrus Holt was gone. The last ghost was banished. That night, the camp was quiet. They sat around a large fire, the rescued hostages wrapped in blankets. They had counted their dead. They had counted the living. Old Bear stood. "The blood has run," he said, his voice echoing in the small, sacred valley. "The ghosts are at peace, but the world that made them is not. The railroad is still coming. The white man is still coming. The old way, the way of blood, is finished. We cannot hide. We must find a new way to live. We must build." Later, the camp was asleep. Rose sat beside Cain, who was finally, truly, resting. His fever was down. She was dressing the new scratches on her own arms, the raw, red marks from the cliff. "You did not listen," he whispered, his eyes closed. She jumped. "I thought you were asleep. I told you to go," he said, his eyes opening. He looked at her, and his gaze was full of a deep, profound warmth. "And you went, and then I had to follow you. You are a lot of trouble. You are impossible," she said, her voice thick with tears. She touched his face, his good side. He caught her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. He was weak, but his grip was firm. "When I was on that ridge," he said, his voice low, "I was so weak. I could barely see. I thought I would miss it. I thought Blevins would kill you all. And my only thought was that I would die without telling you." Telling me what she whispered, leaning closer. "That night in the cave," he said, his thumb rubbing the back of her hand. "It was not just the storm. It was not just desire. I was binding my life to yours. I wanted to tell you, properly, not as a warrior, but as a man." Rose felt her heart swell, a painful, beautiful ache. She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his. "Cain," she whispered, "when you took that bullet for me in the saloon, when I saw you fall, I knew I did not just want to live. I wanted to live with you. There is no Ohio. There is no other life. There is only this. Just you." He used his good arm to pull her down, a gentle, weak pull that she met halfway. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, fiery kiss of the storm. It was not the fast, claiming kiss of a warrior. It was slow. It was deep. It was a promise. It was the kiss of two people who had walked through hell and found each other on the other side. It was a kiss of peace, and it was a kiss of beginning. The sun rose, washing the small valley in a new, clean light. There was no more bounty. There was no more Cyrus Holt. The future was still uncertain. The railroad was still coming, but they would face it, together. The weeks that followed the final battle in the canyon were a strange, breathless quiet. The war was over, but the world had not yet settled. Kane's recovery was the new center of their universe. He had been carried back to the hidden valley, a conquering hero who was as weak as a child. Old Bear's poultices and Naomi's relentless, bullying care fought back the infection, but the wound in his shoulder was deep, a terrible, ragged map of Cyrus Holt's final act. Rose never left his side. She was his hands when he could not feed himself. She was his guard when the fever dreams came, when he thrashed and cried out, fighting ghosts in his sleep. She would hold his good hand, her own calloused, small hand, and whisper to him, her voice a steady anchor in his dark. I am here. You are safe. You are alive. Kane, stay with me. Stay. He lived. The valley lived. They were grieving Taza most of all, a silent, hollowed-out man who spent his days staring at the grave of his brother. But they were alive. After a month, when Kane could finally stand, leaning heavily on a stick, the new law arrived. Marshal Davies did not send a deputy. He rode out by himself, with 2 armed men he had brought from Santa Fe and the railroad man, who looked profoundly uncomfortable. They stopped at the mouth of the valley, a clear sign they were not an invasion. Taza and Kane, flanked by Naomi, went to meet him. Rose walked beside Kane, her hand on his back, steadying him. The marshal, his face still bearing a scar from the flying glass, looked at the small, fierce group. He looked at the healing wound on Kane's shoulder. He looked at Rose, who was no longer a pale, terrified girl, but a hard, watchful woman. Well, Davies said, clearing his throat, a lot has happened. He unrolled a scroll of papers. I have concluded my investigation in Dust Creek. Silas Thorne, upon being faced with his own mortality, has provided a full confession. He will be tried in Santa Fe, but his testimony is thorough. He looked at the papers. First, by the authority of the United States government, all assets, properties, and accounts belonging to Cyrus Holt are forfeit. His ranch, his cattle, his money, it is all seized to pay his debts to this territory. Taza just stared at him. Second, the marshal looked at Rose. I have reviewed the will of Edgar Thorne and the correspondence you provided. The Spring Creek parcel, including its water rights, was legally deeded to you, Rose Parker, as a condition of your arrival. It was, in effect, your dowry. It is not part of Holt's estate. It is yours. Free and clear. The law recognizes it. He handed her the deed, now stamped with a heavy, official seal. Third, he said, looking at Taza, and then at Naomi. The sworn testimonies of the Mescalero people have been entered into the record. The murders, the land grabs, the harassment, it is all in the report. Holt's men are scattered. Blevins is dead. The reign, as you called it, is over. The railroad man stepped forward, his face pale but determined. Miss Parker, Mr. Blackwind, the railroad is still coming, but we do not build on blood. If we can help it, we have rerouted the main spur. We will be approaching Dust Creek from the south, well away from your lands, and well away from the Mescalero territory. We trust this is satisfactory. They left. The meeting was over. The law, for the first time, had come and gone, and left peace in its wake. They stood there, the 5 of them, in the mouth of the valley. Rose was holding the paper, her paper. Taza spat on the ground. Paper. It is just paper. What good is it? It is our paper, Rose said, her voice quiet. She looked at the land described, the Spring Creek parcel. She knew it. Kane had shown it to her once, from a distance. It lay in the basin directly between Dust Creek and the mountains, a natural buffer zone. This land, she said, her voice gaining strength. It has water. It is good land. It is not a place to hide. It is a place to build. Naomi looked at her. Her eyes narrowed. Build what a white woman's ranch. You will hire us to tend your cattle. There was still a sting in her voice. No, Rose said, meeting her gaze. Not my ranch. Our ranch. She looked from Naomi to Taza, to the other warriors, and back to Cain, who was watching her, his pride a visible light in his exhausted eyes. We cannot stay here, Rose said, gesturing to the hidden valley. This is a grave. This is a place to hide. But we are not hiding anymore. We cannot stay separate. Old Bear was right. We must find a new way. She held up the paper. This is the new way. We built a ranch, a farm, on this land. Together. All of us. We share the water. We share the work. The Apache will not be renegades hiding in the rocks. You will be homesteaders, landowners, with a paper that the law has to honor. And the poor men in town, the ones Holt crushed, they can work for a share, not for a tyrant. Naomi was skeptical. White men and Apache, sharing water. Taza, do you hear this? She is dreaming. They will kill each other before the first well is dug. If we are separate, Rose said, her voice ringing with the truth Cain had taught her, they will crush us. One by one, they will call you savages and call me a whore. But if we are together, if we are a community, an economic force, with a legal deed, we are too strong to be broken. Naomi was silent, but Rose could see the practical, intelligent mind working behind her eyes. This was not a plea for emotional unity. It was a strategy for survival. Taza, who had been silent, finally spoke. His voice was rough with grief. My brother is dead. My son lives. Because you, he looked at Rose, pulled him from the edge. I will not have him grow up hiding. I will not have him grow up a ghost. He looked at the paper. We will build. I will honor my brother. We will build a place where his son can stand in the sun. The transition was not easy. It was hard. Grueling work. They left the hidden valley, a sad, quiet procession, and moved to Spring Creek. It was a raw, windy basin, but the water was sweet and the soil was rich. They built sod houses first, cutting bricks from the thick prairie turf. They built a main cabin from cottonwood. For shared meals, they dug a well, a real one, deep and stone-lined. Rose worked alongside them. Her hands, which had been raw, then calloused, were now strong. She swung a pick, she hauled water, she mixed mud and straw. She laughed when she was covered in it, a real, full-bodied laugh that surprised them all. The work was a slow, painful, beautiful healing. One afternoon, a month into the building, the Dust Creek stagecoach made a special stop. It was the first time it had ever come this way. A woman descended. She was dressed in black, shining silk, even in the dust. She held a small parasol, which was useless against the wind. She looked at the raw, muddy buildings, at the mix of Apache children and white workers, at the horses. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Rose, she called out, her voice a thin, Boston-bred shriek. Rose walked over, wiping her hands on her trousers. She had been helping Taza frame a new horse stable. She was covered in sweat, sawdust, and mud. Aunt Mildred, Rose said, her voice flat. She had not seen this woman in a year, and it felt like 1,000. Oh, my child! The woman gasped, rushing forward, then stopping, clearly afraid to touch her. Rose Parker. What has happened to you, your face, your hands, your clothes? We heard, the terrible rumors. That you had been captured. That you were involved in a scandal. The railroad man, it turned out, had written a very detailed letter home. I am not captured. Aunt, Rose said. I am here to take you home, Aunt Mildred said, her voice regaining its command. Thank God I have found you. We will get you in the bath. We will get you in a proper dress. We will go back to Ohio. We can tell everyone you were sick, that you had a fever and lost your memory. We can fix this child. We can bring you back to civilization. Rose looked at her aunt. She looked at the black silk dress, a prison of stays and buttons. She looked at the pale, soft hands that had never done a day's work. She looked at the pinched, fearful face. Then Rose looked back. She looked at the half-finished stable. She looked at Naomi, who was teaching Taza's son to weave a small basket, the two of them laughing. She looked at Cain. He was leaning against a post, watching them. His shoulder was healed, though he would never have full use of the arm. He was thinner, scarred. He was watching, his face quiet, giving her the space to fight this battle herself. He was not her rescuer anymore. He was her partner. Rose turned back to her aunt. "No," Rose said. "No, what do you mean? No, Rose. You are coming with me. This is madness. You are living in the dirt." "With them," Home Rose said, and the word felt strange in her mouth. "Ohio is not my home. Boston is not civilization. Civilization. Aunt Mildred is a place that values a girl so little. Her own family ships her away for a life she did not choose. Civilization is a room full of men who laugh when a woman is slapped. Civilization is a man who tries to sell you, and a man who tries to kill you for a piece of paper." She held up her hands. They were brown, calloused, and scarred. "These are my hands. I am building my home. I am not running, I am not hiding, and I am not a scandal. I am, for the first time in my life, exactly who I'm supposed to be. I am defining my own life." Aunt Mildred's mouth opened and closed. She saw the girl she had known was gone. In her place was this hard, brown, terrifying woman, standing beside a half-naked savage. She turned, wordlessly, got back in the stagecoach, and pulled the door shut. Rose watched it go. A cloud of dust. She did not feel sad. She felt free. Life settled. The ranch, which they called Spring Creek Crossing, grew. The work was hard, but it was honest. But the nights were still long. Cain's body had healed. His mind was slower. He would wake in the night, his body drenched in sweat, his good hand reaching for a rifle that was not there. He would sit outside their small, new-built cabin, staring at the moon. He was fighting the ghosts. Taza's brother, the men he had killed, the soldiers he had trusted, the blood. Rose would find him. She would come out, not speaking, and wrap a heavy wool blanket around them both, pulling him back against her. One night, the cold was sharp, and the stars were a brilliant, aching spray. He was shaking. So much blood. "Rose," he whispered, his voice rough. "My whole life. I have walked in it. I have spilled it. Taza's brother. He was just a boy." Rose held him, her arms wrapped around his chest, her cheek against his scarred back. "You are not the blood you spilled." "Cain," she whispered, her voice fierce. He tensed. "Listen to me," she said. "You are not the man you killed. You are the lives you saved. You are Taza's son, who is alive and learning to read. You are Naomi, who has a home again. You are an old bear, who is safe. You are the people who are working on this ranch, who have food because of this place. You are not your past. You are the man who saved me from a dark room. You are not a ghost. Cain Black Wind. You are my home." He turned in her arms, his face buried in her neck. He did not speak, but his body, which had been a taut wire, finally, went still. He held her, and he was healed. The next day, he made an announcement. "We will have a ceremony," he said, not to Rose, but to the camp. "A wedding," Naomi asked, her eyes bright with a rare, teasing light. "A partnership," Cain corrected, though he was looking at Rose. "We will join, in the way of the people, and," Rose added, stepping forward, "in the way of the law. We will have Old Bear lead the rites, and we will ask Marshal Davies to come, as a witness, to sign the book. We will be a bridge, in all ways." The night before, the air was full of the smell of roasting corn and pit-baked meats. A quiet, joyful celebration was building. Rose went to the new well, the one she had helped dig, to pull a bucket of water. She was tired, happy, and nervous. She set the bucket on the stone lip and looked down. The moon was high. She saw her reflection in the still water. The face that looked back was not the pale, plain girl from the train. It was a new woman. Her skin was a deep, healthy brown. Her hair was thick, tied back with a simple leather thong. The scar on her chin was still there, a pale crescent. Her eyes were clear. Her hands, holding the edge of the well, were the hands of a worker. They were strong. She remembered the girl who had cried in the cave, the girl who had said, "I'm not pretty." She looked at her reflection, at this new, strong face, and for the first time in her 19 years, she saw the truth. She was beautiful. Not by their standards, by hers. She smiled at the woman in the water. A shadow fell over the well. She did not start. She knew his step. Cain came up behind her. He did not make a sound. His arms wrapped around her waist, his body fitting against her back, his chin resting on her hair. They stood in silence for a long moment, looking at their two reflections in the water. "What are you thinking?" he whispered. She leaned her head back against his good shoulder. A small, playful smile touched her lips. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice a low tease. "I am still not a pretty girl, by Eastern standards." He laughed, a low, warm rumble in his chest. "Good. I have no use for Eastern standards." He turned her in his arms, his face serious in the moonlight, his eyes full of the same fire she had seen in the cave. "You are the forever beauty of this land, Rose Parker. You are my heart, and—" He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of promise and of home. "You are mine." They were married on a high, grassy knoll that overlooked the new settlement. It was not a church, and it was not a sacred canyon. It was a new place, a place of their own, balanced between the mountains and the plains. The day was clear, the sky a painful, brilliant blue. The wind was gentle. On one side of the fire, Taza and the remaining Mescalero family stood. They wore their best, their buckskins soft and beaded, their faces somber but not hostile. Old Bear, his white hair unbound, stood closest to the fire. On the other side, a small, unpleasant group from Dust Creek. Marshall Davies was there, his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable but resolute. With him was the young railroad man, who had come to see this strange new alliance for himself. Even a few of the town's poor, the ones who had already begun to find work at Spring Creek Crossing, stood shyly, their own hats in their hands. In the middle stood Rose and Cain. She did not wear white. She wore the simple, soft deerskin dress Naomi had made for her, clean and new, her hair in a single long braid. She was barefoot, her strong, calloused feet planted firmly on the earth. Cain stood beside her. He wore clean buckskins, and his left arm, still bound, was tucked into a sling Naomi had beaded with turquoise. He was thinner, and his face would forever carry the lines of the fever and the fight. But he stood tall. His eyes, fixed on her, were clear and full of a deep, quiet light. Old Bear raised his hands. He did not speak in English. He spoke in the language of the mountain, his voice a dry, timeless rasp. He spoke of the earth and the sky. He spoke of the two hawks he had seen that morning, hunting not as rivals, but as one. Their shadows joined on the canyon floor. When he was finished, he looked at them. The land does not ask the color of the foot that walks on it. The water does not ask the color of the throat that drinks. Only the hearts of men build boundaries. Today, we unbuilt. He joined their hands. Then, Marshall Davies stepped forward, his own heavy, leather-bound ledger in his hand. He opened it to a new page. "The territory of New Mexico recognizes this union," he said, his voice loud, for the record. "By the power vested in me, I declare this a legal and binding marriage." He held out a pen. "The book, ma'am." Rose took the pen. Her hand did not shake. She signed her name. The letters clear and strong, Rose Parker Blackwind. Cain looked at the pen, then at the marshal. He took it, and with his good right hand, he made a single, strong mark beside her name. An X, a cross, a new boundary of his own. A great cheer went up, a strange and wonderful sound, of Apache cries and white men's yells, all mixing in the clean, high desert air. The feast was not a feast, it was a sharing. They roasted a deer that Taza had brought down.
and they baked cornbread in the ashes. The railroad man, in a surprising gesture, had brought a small keg of beer, which the men, red and white, shared with a new, awkward civility. A drum began to beat, a low, steady pulse. One of the warriors began to sing, a song of thanks, of rain, of a good hunt. Cain, who had been sitting, rose slowly. He held out his good hand to his wife. "Rose Blackwind," he said, "will you dance?" She had never danced a step in her life. Not really. Her aunt had said she was clumsy. "I do not know how," she whispered, her face flushing. "There is nothing to know," he said, pulling her gently to her feet. "You just listen to the heart." He led her to the fire. He could not lift his arms. He could not leap. He just moved, a slow, grounded shuffle, his feet honoring the earth, his body swaying to the rhythm. He moved around her, and she, caught in his orbit, began to move too. She followed him, her own feet finding the beat, her body, for the first time, not a thing of shame, but a thing of joy. Naomi watched, her hard face soft, a small, real smile on her lips. Taza sat beside his son, his gaze on the fire, but he was listening. And he was, for the first time since his brother's death, at peace. Rose, the pale girl, the curse, was dancing. And she was, Taza had to admit, beautiful. Their cabin was small, but the walls were thick. They had built it themselves, and it smelled of new-cut pine and fresh mud chinking. The moon was high, the same moon that had lit her terror in the storeroom, the same moon that had lit their passion in the cave. Tonight, it was just a light, a soft, silver-blue glow that fell through the single, glass-paned window. He was sitting on the edge of the simple bed, his shoulder free of its sling for the night. The wound was a puckered, angry purple, a new, terrible scar on his map. He was exhausted. Rose came to him. She had brushed her hair, 100 strokes, letting it fall, thick and clean, over her shoulders. She knelt in front of him, her hands on his knees. "You are in pain?" she whispered. "No," he said, his voice rough. "It is just new." He looked at her, truly looked at his wife. He reached out with his good hand, his fingers tracing the things he had claimed. He touched the faint, silvery scar on her chin. "The girl who fell," he whispered. He touched the faint, faded yellow remains of the bruise on her cheek. "The woman who was struck." He lifted her hands, his thumb rubbing the calluses on her palms. The small, white, healed-over scars on her wrists from the rope. "The warrior who fought." His hand went to her arms, to the long, red scratches from the cliff, the ones that were now healing. "The protector who saved. You are a map, Rose Blackwind," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard. "And every mark on you is a mark of honor. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever known." She rose, and she kissed his hand. She held it to her cheek. Then, she let her own hands trace his story. She touched the old bullet wound on his good shoulder. "The scout," she whispered. She touched the long, pale scar that ran down his chest. "The man who fought for his people." And then, her fingers, light as a breath, traced the edge of the new, raw wound on his left shoulder. The wound he had taken for her. "My husband," she said, her voice breaking. "My heart, my protector." He pulled her to him, his good arm strong, his wounded one weak, but they held each other. They did not fall into the bed. They sat, fully clothed, in the moonlight, in their new, safe home, and they held each other. It was a joining, not of bodies, but of souls. It was the end of the war. It was the beginning of peace. The years were kind, but they were not easy. Spring Creek Crossing did not become a paradise. It became a home. It grew. The sod houses were replaced by solid wood cabins. A large, stone-built barn rose, the finest in the territory. The horse herd, bred from Cain's stallion and the best mares, became known. The land was fertile. They had food, they had water, and they had peace. The railroad came, but it passed to the south, a thin, distant ribbon of smoke.
It brought new people, new goods, but it could not touch the crossing. The crossing was built on a different foundation. It became a stopping place, a sanctuary for travelers, for displaced families, for men looking for honest work. It became a legend. This strange ranch where Apache and white men worked side by side, their children playing in the same dirt. Naomi became the true boss of the ranch. She was a natural leader, sharp-witted and fair. She never lost her edge, but her anger softened. A few years later, she married a Navajo farmer who had drifted in, a widower with a quiet strength that matched her own. Their marriage was loud and argumentative, and full of a deep, profound love. And Rose Blackwind. She sat on the porch of the main house, a solid, comfortable home they had built with their own hands. She was no longer 19. She was 40. Her brown hair was streaked with silver, and her face was lined, not with fear, but with sun and laughter and time. She was strong. She was the heart of the crossing. She was surrounded by children. 2 were her own, a son with his father's eyes and her quiet strength, and a daughter with her mother's wild hair and Naomi's sharp tongue. But there were others. Taza's son, now a tall, proud young man, called her Aunt. And there were the orphans, the children left behind by the railroad, by the fever, by the endless, grinding hardship of the West. Apache children, Mexican children, white children. They were all hers. They were sitting on the steps, a cluster of them, their faces rapt. "And I was so scared," she was saying, her voice warm. The story as familiar to them as their own names. "I was in a dark room, and I had been told my whole life that I was not worth anything." "Why, Mama?" her daughter asked, though she knew the answer. "Because I had not learned to see myself," Rose said. "I let other people tell me who I was, and I looked at this warrior, this great, silent, scary man, and I said the most foolish thing I have ever said." She paused, a small, theatrical intake of breath. The children leaned in. "I said, 'I'm not pretty.'" A low chuckle came from the chair beside her. Cain sat there. He was older. His black hair was more gray than black. His body was stiff, and his left arm was mostly useless, held in a permanent, gentle sling of his own making. But his eyes, as they rested on his wife, were the same. They were clear, they were sharp, and they were full of a love that was as solid as the mountains behind them. He was whittling, his good hand still impossibly clever with a knife. A small wooden bird was taking shape. "She always forgets the important part," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. The children laughed. "She forgets," he continued, not looking up from his work, "that she had just shot a man twice her size, and she forgets that when she was learning to use that revolver, she was shaking so hard she almost shot me in the foot." "I did not," Rose said, with mock indignation. "You did," he said, his eyes smiling. "You were more dangerous to your friends than your enemies in those first weeks." Rose laughed, a real, warm laugh that set the lines around her eyes crinkling. She reached over and put her hand on his, the one that held the knife. His skin was warm and dry. "And what did you say, Mama?" her son asked, prompting her. Rose looked at her husband, their hands clasped. "I said, 'I'm not pretty.'" And he looked at me, as if he was seeing the sun for the first time. And he said, Cain finished, his voice soft, "You are my forever beauty." The story settled over them, a familiar, warm blanket. It was their myth. It was the truth. The sun was setting. The vast, open land was painted in shades of gold and purple. The fields of corn were high. The horses were running in the far pasture. From the Apache camp, still in the hills, but no longer hiding, the smell of cook smoke rose, the distant, lonely whistle of the train. Far to the south was just another sound, a part of the world, no longer a threat. High above, a single hawk circled, its wings spread wide, catching the last light. It hung there, a perfect, free, and beautiful thing. This was the West. It was not a place of laws or of savagery. It was a place of choice. It had taken a plain, worthless girl and a broken, haunted warrior, and it had forged them into a new life. It has proved that no one has the right to tell you your value. It has proved that love is not about finding a perfect person, but about seeing the beauty in the scars. And it has proved that even in the heart of violence, a place of justice and freedom and love can be built, if you are brave enough to stand and to fight and to build it together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from. It is always a pleasure to see how far these tales travel. If you enjoyed this journey, please be sure to subscribe to the Wild West Tales channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help share this story with even more listeners.